Hello everybody and welcome into my latest... Is it over? Did it end? Did my intro end? There I am! Welcome into my latest live video. Today it is Tuesday, the 12th of April, 2022, and my name is Gary Holzman. Yesterday, if you joined us during a very long live stream, you saw me slowly get more and more frustrated while I was getting hungry, and little things that at first I was brushing off later came back to really get on my nerves. And so then at that point, you know, I was getting upset at every little thing. So I want to talk to you about the things that can go wrong in computer builds that I don't really see discussed too much on all the tech enthusiast channels here on YouTube, and that is your parts selection. You see, I'm a little spoiled as a PC builder. I have the opportunity to try all different kinds of parts and gauge whether or not those parts are reliable, easy to install, easy to configure, and through the variety of parts, from cases to motherboards and even RAM and coolers, I'm in a unique position where I get my hands on a lot of stuff the average enthusiast who doesn't, you know, for example, have a YouTube channel, just the normal individual computer experiences that we have as individuals. You know, how often does somebody get a new computer? And a lot can change with regards to what hardware is the best hardware to buy, or what hardware fits together well from the last time you bought to the next time you buy, right? There'll be a big gap. And so I've got a system down that works really well for me, and you've seen me promote the 8-year build. It's usually about $800, $900, depending on how you spec it out. But that's a good solid build. It's super easy to build. There shouldn't be any frustration in it. All the parts fit together well, but there's no color matching, and there's no glass panel, and there's no RGB, and there's no liquid cooler. And so all of that stuff can go completely wrong if it's not all paired together. And I don't think enough YouTube channels in particular put enough emphasis on the importance of the research if what you're going after is something that's going to both be fast and reliable and look amazing. That's going to take, in my experience, about 3 times more work and about twice as much money. So if the 8-year build were to be put into an RGB case with a liquid cooler, and then we add other RGB accoutrements to it, from fans and LED strip lighting, we're going to take the labor involved in that, and we're going to approximately triple it, depending on the individual hardware, but it's just a lot more work. The result of that work and spending the money is if it's all paired together well, it matches, the color matches on the color of the board, the color of the RAM, even the color of the GPU. But at the same time, you want that performance and reliability, so you're not scraping the bottom of the barrel looking for the cheapest parts to accomplish this. This is for people who have the time to invest in this project and who have the extra money to spend on things that aren't necessary for the computer to work or to be reliable. And there's a growing number of people that would apply to. And I essentially, when I was sent the case from Be Quiet, they sent me the case, the power supply, and the cooler. I don't know if they anticipated that I was going to use all 3 in the same build. I sent an open invitation to them because they had asked about a couple of parts if I was interested in reviewing. And I said, you can send whatever you want, you know, I'll use it in something. Eventually, you know, I won't put a time period on it, but if you send it to me, I will use it and I will review it. I didn't think at the time that I was going to end up really frustrating myself and hurting myself. I don't know what I did to my hand yesterday, but these 2 fingers hurt to bend. I've got I guess I was leaning on the counter and I got a blister on my elbow. You know, not exactly anything I got to go to the hospital for, but I am hurting. This hand hurts. So I don't know what I did, but I'm sure I did it when I was building this computer. And one of the mistakes I made when I built it is I looked at the white case and I looked at the white on the motherboard and I said, these 2 things match color-wise. It's going to look good. But essentially, I'd made the same mistake the professionals over at Lyte Computers made when they initially sold the system to our friend Marvin. And that is, they were buying parts they had no experience with. And so they had to call Marvin and tell him the case they were going to build in is too small, and they had to give him some more money so they could buy a bigger case. And in that case was too small. And here I am chastising them, and I end up putting that motherboard in a case that's too small. The difference is I wouldn't sell it to anybody this way. So out of curiosity, you know, I said, look, if anybody wants to buy it, just make me an offer, because I was frustrated and I want to get it out of here. But I wouldn't sell it in this condition. This is not acceptable. This doesn't meet my standards. And so I had some time to really give it some thought last night and think about how it all went wrong. And so the first assumption I made, and I've done this before, and that is thinking that because the same manufacturer makes the case and the power supply and the cooler, that they'll all fit together properly. No, this is not true of coolers that Corsair makes fitting into all the cases Corsair makes, nor is it true, I don't believe NZXT coolers will fit in all NZXT cases, and that proper research has to be done. I also assumed that when the parts were sent to me, they were meant to go together, though nobody said that to me. I wrongly assumed it. And I was driven by the color of the case and the color of the board. I don't see white cases that often, and nor do I see boards with white accents too often. So I thought, you know, apart from the power supply being black, you can't really see that because the shroud is covering it. And I went at this completely wrong. Now, again, if you want to follow like my 8-year build and you want to have the same experience that I have, which is that the build goes easy and that it is reliable and quiet and fast, then you can't substitute any of the parts. If you buy the exact parts, then you'll have the exact experience. But the minute you deviate and you decide you want something different, you may be opening Pandora's box to problems. We had a customer a couple years ago, if you remember, who didn't buy the RAM that was recommended. Catherine Anna Hauserman had given them a parts list, and she did all the research, and she's in the chat today, and she's happy to put a parts list together for you based on your budget and your needs, and she can do that for you. And she does it for free, and she's been doing it for years, and nobody's ever complained. Like they're all grateful. They're like, hey, thanks to Catherine Anna Hauserman for helping me pick the parts and then following your videos, Carrie, as a guide. You know, clearly they have to figure out things on their own because I'm not building exactly what they're building. And they've all had great experiences, right? And Catherine's doing that for free. So Catherine does that for a viewer. The viewer orders the parts, sends them to me, and then I go to build the computer, and I can't get the liquid cooler to fit because the RGB RAM is too tall and the cooler's hitting the RAM. So I wrongly assumed that Catherine, who normally puts together great parts list, made a mistake. But then Catherine reached out and said, that's not the part I recommended. That is not on my parts list. So then I go back to the customer and I'm like, what's going on here? And he said he changed the RAM to RGB RAM because he wanted RGB RAM and didn't realize that that would be a problem. But I never saw the original parts list in detail. I think it was sent to me, and I'm just confident, you know, if Catherine put it together, I don't need to, you know, second guess it. But it didn't occur to me that the customer would just on a whim change the part and then not tell me. So I'm assuming, you see there's a common denominator, that all the parts that were sent to me are directly off the list. And I'm working on so many computers, I can't remember what one list says compared to another one. Like, you know, there's just too much going on. When you're working at scale and you've got so many machines to work on, it's not like somebody sitting at home building one computer and they've got no other computers to build after that. So they can really enjoy their build and look forward to an opportunity to do it again, and maybe even feel jealous that I get to build so many. But as you can see, especially from yesterday's show, when it starts getting into the ridiculous, right, where we start caring about liquid, in this case RGB, and then paint matching and things like that, it's sort of taking a priority way too high compared to everything fitting together well. and I did this to myself. I have no one to blame but myself for this. There's nothing wrong, because I haven't talked to Be Quiet about this, and I'm sure they weren't pleased with my reaction yesterday, but I want to be fair. And I don't think any of these parts from Be Quiet are bad. I think they have, each part, whether it's the case, the power supply, or the liquid cooler, they have what I think are shortcomings. So in the case of the power supply, I don't like those vertical plugs. And you saw why yesterday. It blocks trying to get in there and make any changes without having to take the whole power supply out. I don't like the pump being up here on the cooler because it's messy. It looks terrible. So if there wasn't a window and you couldn't see it, it wouldn't bother me so much. But having a wire coming out of the top of the, right up here at the hoses, there's a wire. It's just unappealing aesthetically. As for the fans being loud, I plugged the fans on the cooler down onto the chassis fan header. I probably should have plugged them into the CPU fan header in retrospect, but regardless, there are no fan controls other than what your BIOS is going to support in your motherboard. And to me, it doesn't make the cooler terrible, but it certainly could have been made better. When it comes to cooling performance, it ran great. And understand that we've got a very hot consumer CPU in there. It's going to get really hot. And to put an air cooler on it, first of all, isn't visibly appealing when you've got a glass window. And secondly, may not keep this CPU cool enough when you're really pressing it hard like I do with Prime 95. We had it running Prime 95 for about 25 minutes, 23 minutes. And we were still on the 70 degrees, as I recall. So that was a great performance out of the cooler. So when we look at the case in and of itself, again, it's not bad, but it's got some little issues that really got in the way when combined with a power supply that had a couple issues, and then the water cooler, I think, leaves us a little short on some things. And so combining these parts together was a recipe for frustration and working harder than I really needed to work to build a computer, and for all the wrong reasons. And so, I always tell you to enjoy your build. It should be a fun process. And if you watched yesterday's video, I was very much in a good mood and looking forward to this build. And as it went on and I start hitting frustrations I'm not accustomed to having, because I'm always familiar, when I'm doing my builds, they are builds I'm familiar with. I know this motherboard, I know this case, I know which coolers to use and which coolers not to use, which RAM to use. And when I stick to the script, everything comes out fine. But the minute I go off script and I start, assuming it's all going to be the same, again, that's on me for being a little overconfident and making too many assumptions about the parts fitting together, and that the individual shortcomings of each part not being a big deal. But when you combine these parts that, in my opinion, again, have these little shortcomings all in one system, it's too much. It's overwhelming. So if the power supply were used in a different build, if the liquid cooler was used in a different case, if this motherboard was put in a different case, if we separate these parts out into different builds, now you have one component, let's say, that has a shortcoming instead of 3 or 4. And that changes the whole perspective of the process, right, of the outcome and what it's going to take to get you there. And I stubbornly, rather than saying, okay, this isn't going to work, I stubbornly made it work. And it just got me angry. And I'll tell you what I should have done. What I should have done is recognized immediately that liquid cooler, if I would have started with the liquid cooler, put the fans on it and set it up there and held it with my hand and see how much room I have, I would have immediately noticed it's going to cover the top of the motherboard, and I wouldn't have needed to go any further than that. Now, some people might say, why is that a big deal? So what if it's covering the top of the motherboard? Well, it gets into maintenance and repair work. Under normal circumstances, if I had to change out this rear fan, and let's say it's a Corsair 200R, I take out 4 screws, I take this panel off, I pull the cable, I take the fan out, I put a new fan in, put the 4 screws back in, put the new cable back on, wire tie that cable, put the panel back on. I should be in and out in 20 minutes. But if I have to remove the liquid cooler assembly, that's 8 screws across the top. And remember, it's being, attached to the CPU, so now I have to be very delicate with it so I don't have it fall or potentially hit something that could damage the radiator or cause damage to the motherboard if it slams against the board because it's hanging off of the hoses. Just to change a fan, this becomes a lot of work. If I want to change the RAM or add more RAM, it's the cooler's in the way. The cooler has to come out. Now, this isn't the end of the world to take out the cooler, but it's doing more work than you should have to do to accomplish the same thing. And if you're in business and time is money, that is a more expensive job to do. It's going to require more time, and as a result, it's going to cost the customer more money. Also, if it's a warranty job that I'm doing, then it's costing me personally more money because now I can't get in and out as quickly. That eats up hours of my day that I could be spending building another system or doing a repair that I'm getting paid for. And there's only so many hours in the day. I can't add any more hours. That's all there is. So if this takes me longer to work on and it's under warranty that I'm doing the work, then it's eating into my profits for that day. And it could have a domino-like effect where suddenly one thing gets delayed, everything after it gets delayed, and everything that comes after that gets delayed, and you keep stacking it up and you're 4 or 5 months behind. Like, it gets that bad sometimes. Now, I honestly feel that this motherboard with that CPU needs a liquid cooler because of the CPU it has. And the RAM it's in it is fine, and the solid state, the 980 Pro Samsung 1 terabyte PCIe Gen 4 NVMe drive, that's all paired together perfectly. So the motherboard, the CPU, and this cooler with that RAM and solid state drive, no improvements to be made there. Where the improvement needs to be is in the case for those parts. So you see where I'm going with this? If I take these parts out and put parts in that could perhaps run off an air cooler and the motherboard's not as big, it's not going to visually be as appealing, but it's going to follow the standard of everything being easily accessible without having to take it halfway apart to get to something that shouldn't have anything blocking it, in my opinion, unless you're building like a mini ITX or you're going for a specific smaller size where things have to be layered on top of each other to get to that size or that case design. I don't see anything about this case that would require this case to be an inch shorter or an inch less in depth as it is. If it were an inch taller or 2 inches taller and an inch longer, we wouldn't have the screws hanging on the outside of the case like that. And the spacing between the back of the power supply and the hard drive cage would also extend by another inch. And if this case, if you can visualize looking at this case an inch taller and an inch longer, does it change the case at all in your mind? Does it make it less appealing? But it would make it so much easier to work on. So I think this case is not ideal for a liquid cooler because of its proximity to the top of the board. So liquid coolers are immediately out. Unless you want to put the liquid cooler in the front vertically, but this cooler is so big, we'd have to take the hard drive cage out and there would be no way to put the hard drive cage back in. That's it. You've got to sacrifice one for the other. So that means this is a bad case choice for those components. So guess what I'm going to do today? I'm going to go ahead and remove the motherboard and the power supply from the case. And then I'm going to take a spare board I've got laying around here, like a B365M 9th Gen Micro ATX. I'll put it in there using an air cooler. And when we take the board out, we'll keep the liquid cooler attached to the water block. And this makes it a little bit, you got to be careful, because you got to keep the two things together. If one falls, it could put undue stress onto the other things that are holding on to, holding it, whether it's the hoses or the cabling. But if we're careful with it, then we can move it into a larger case. So something like a Pure Base 600 from Be Quiet or Corsair 4000D. So as long as we don't have the interference of the cooler coming down over the top of the board, then dealing with the shortcomings regarding the fact that the light comes on around the block, but it doesn't match the lighting on the board. Again, it's a shortcoming, it's not a big deal. I mean, we could even disconnect the light altogether. But if we want it, we're paying for the light, we might as well use it. It's a minor little thing. As for the cable being like that, I mean, you're gonna have cables, whether it's a USB cable or something coming off of the block somehow, some way on any liquid cooler. I think it's unfortunate that they put it so visibly right in the middle like that, but it can be zip tied along the back side of the hose, and so we can do our best to hide it. It's just more work you wouldn't normally have to do. It's unusual work. And then the other thing would be putting the power supply into that bigger case where we have power supply cables that are this long, which doesn't make any sense in a small case. That's all stuff we have to manage and figure out where we're going to put it back here, and it's starting to look like a cramped space, even though they've done a good job. Be Quiet has done a good job giving us some room here for cabling. So that's on me, right? That's all on me. I, of all people, should have known better. And it's a lack of experience and familiarity with these particular parts paired the way that they're paired together. That's a part of the whole review process, is to familiarize myself with the components and their strengths and their weaknesses as I see it as a PC builder. And if you're just somebody at home and you're building one computer and you've got no other responsibilities, so if you've got to take the liquid cooler out to change a fan, it's not a big deal to you because you got nothing else going on. Heck, you might even look forward to it. But that's not normal, and it's not desirable at scale. It's very, very difficult and extremely time consuming if you're building a bunch of systems like this and you have to do any work to them. It's very difficult. As you saw yesterday, you saw where my frustrations were. As I mentioned, I've been a little spoiled in that I have been able to pick the case and motherboard and CPU and RAM and solid state drive, and it all just fits together like butter. It just, like butter? It fits together like Legos. It just fits perfectly. And it's almost effortless. And I always tell you guys, if you want to build a computer, it's super easy. Just follow my build. But the minute you deviate from those parts, oh boy, roll the dice or do some more research. I'm not going to sit here and do research on these parts. I got other things to do. I'm a person of action. I want to get it done, and we'll figure it out when we get there. That usually works out well for me. It didn't yesterday. So now I'm going to, all that work I did yesterday, that's all coming apart now. Like I said, I'm going to leave the liquid cooler attached, and I will move this motherboard with the RAM, CPU, cooler, and solid state drive into a different case. And we can go ahead and move the power supply with it, because what I'm going to put in here won't require an 850 watt power supply. And I don't want those long cables, because you need to have a SATA cable plugged into this front RGB front on this case. That's how it powers it. And they don't give us any short power cables. So this doesn't need as expensive of a power supply in it when I change it out. I don't like there's no hard drive LED. I don't like there's no reset. And I especially don't like they've only given us one USB 3.0 port. That's it. They're taking two off the motherboard, but they're only giving us one back. And at this price for this case, that's a budget case move. If you ever see a case that only has one USB 3.0 port, you're looking at a budget case regardless of what the price is. So these were all surprises. They all blindsided me, whether it was the cooler and its design, or the case and its design, or the power supply and its design. The parts individually are not bad, but when combined together, it was a recipe for frustration. And I'm sure I've done something that I injured my hand in putting everything together. That's very unusual, because I don't know what I did. I don't remember doing anything that caused me any pain, but I sure felt it today. I'm feeling it right now. These two fingers at the knuckles, they really hurt. So I don't know what I did, but you know, I'm going to press on and suffer through it. Such a tough guy. So anyway, so that's what we're going to do today, and I hope that by demonstrating to you in a live, uncut video the entire process, that we go through this experience together so that you are getting the experience vicariously through me as if you did it yourself without having to go through it yourself. And you can understand the importance and the sacrifices that are made when you're prioritizing aesthetics, and that the importance of making sure all the parts are going to fit together well. So when I mentioned earlier that customer changed out the RAM, and when they changed out the RAM being RGB was taller, and the liquid cooler was supposed to slide in, but before the liquid cooler could completely, you know, it's in like a little drawer. Before that drawer could close, it was hitting the top of the RAM. So what do? You can change the RAM or you can change the liquid cooler. But in this customer's case, they ran out of money. So, you know, they shouldn't even have bought the RGB RAM to begin with, but here I am, I'm the guy stuck with the parts. I have to do something with it. Customer lives in another state, so I have to pay for it, or I have to indefinitely sit on it, taking up room in my office, and being held liable for the parts if something were to happen, like a robbery or a fire. I don't want that liability. So I spend the money and I get different RAM. And then in doing that, I had other RAM in the office, is what I did. I went to the back office, saw what I had in stock, tried that, and then we had another issue, which I can't remember now. And then it was like, well, I can change the liquid cooler. You'd have to go back and rewatch that video, but if the parts that Catherine Anna Hauserman had selected were actually purchased, that build would have been done. And as a result of all those delays, and I had to order parts, and I can't sit around waiting for parts. I got to move on to the next project. And so when the parts arrive, then the parts have to wait now, right? So what was at the front of the line gets moved to the back of the line, because I'm not going to stop doing what I'm working on now because these parts now arrive. No, that goes to the back of the line and it can wait for its turn again. Then it comes up for its turn again, and then I run into the next problem. And, you know, I'm getting frustrated. The customer is waiting months for their computer, and I'm saying, hey, you know, you put me in this situation. It's not my fault. We're here, and I've got other customers to tend to. I can't have one customer monopolize my time, and it's costing me money. So you'd think I would have learned back then about the importance of it, and then ended up doing it myself out of everything being so controlled. You know, I'm always using the same motherboards in the same cases, and so I always have the same experience. And I wrongly assume that, you know, when I look at a new case like this one, I kind of look at it and yeah, it looks like a good case. It feels, you know, I feel it. How's it built? It's built really well. But some things you're just not going to be able to anticipate, certainly by eyeballing it, like the depth of the fans going over the top of the motherboard, which is a killer for me. There's a lot of connections across the top of the motherboard. And I run into that mostly in mini ITX systems. But again, we're dealing with a mini ITX board, which is smaller. It's going to be a smaller case, and everything is going to be layered in there to get everything to fit. You're usually going to have, if you're going to have a heat problem, that's where it's going to be. It's going to be on one of these smaller compact systems where things are just layered on top of each other. And if you have to do any work to them, you better set aside enough time and expectation for that to, you know, to budget or schedule enough time to realistically know what's going to be involved with doing what should be a simple job on a regular desktop computer, like changing a rear fan. On a mini ITX computer, you might have to take several things out, including undoing cable management in order to remove parts. So then when you put the parts back in, you got to redo the cable management for those parts again. And, you know, what should be a 5-minute or 10-minute job becomes a 3 or 4 hour affair. So in any event, I'm upset with myself that I fell into this trap. I know better. But I'm going to cut my losses, and what I'm going to do is we're going to pull the board out. We're going to pull that power supply out, and I'm going to put a B365M in there, 9th gen micro ATX board with an air cooler. We'll throw a 500 watt power supply in it, and we'll be using onboard video. basically a budget system for a budget case, and it'll all go just fine with no problems. Then this board will need to go into a larger case. Whether I use I'm kind of leaning on the 4000D from Corsair. I think that will hold the liquid cooler and the motherboard with plenty of room. But I also think the PureBase 600 will also work, except the PureBase 600 is a bigger, heavier case, and it costs me more money to ship it. So if it was being built for somebody locally, I'd probably choose the PureBase 600. But if I'm going to have to ship it somewhere to the United States, I'd rather do the 4000D. It's a lighter case, it's not as heavy, and it won't cost as much to ship. So that's some of the factors I keep in mind when I'm selecting parts. So anyway, was riding through my mind a lot last night on how that could have gone so wrong. And you know, I really enjoy working on computers most of the time. So I've got to ask myself, what was it that made me not enjoy it? At what point did it start? And then it just seemed to spiral downwards and build momentum. And it gets to a point where now every little thing becomes a big deal, right? It's like, now what? And that's where I was at yesterday. And I was getting pretty worked up about it, because these aren't normal problems I deal with in computer building. But I also don't generally just eyeball parts and put them together like that. Like normally, I know my parts. I know the Corsair 200R. I know not to put a liquid cooler in it. Well, now I know not to put a liquid cooler in this one either, unless it's smaller or I'm willing to remove permanently the drive cage for the 3.5-inch drives, which that doesn't feel right to me to do that unless, once again, we're dealing with a very small case. We're dealing with a case design where sacrifices have to be made in order to get that footprint or that, you know, design of case that's very different. But this case design isn't that different, and I don't understand why you should have to make that sacrifice. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's not justifiable, and it makes me angry that I should have to make a sacrifice on a case this physically large and this price. So, you with me? You get where we're at now? Andy Kane says he was just thinking the 4000D himself. I just happen to have a 4000D that Bob Connors had sent brand new in a box, and I think that's going to be the right case for that motherboard combo. Motherboard, CPU, RAM, solid state drive, and liquid cooler, I think will all fit beautifully in the 4000D. As far as the fan noise, again, you have to go into BIOS and control it through there, and that means anytime you get a BIOS update, you'll probably have to reset that yourself, which bothers me. I'd hate to tell somebody not to get BIOS updates, but then if they do it, I can't really walk them through how to set it up, because unless I have the exact motherboard with the exact BIOS, I don't know what they're looking at or where to go to find it. So, you know, maintenance-wise, it's regretful. But regardless, Daniel Ramirez contributes $19.99, and he says, "Here's for your Gatorade fund." Right on, Daniel. Thank you. In fact, I was at Walmart yesterday, and Gatorade was sold out. And then I was over at the grocery store the day before that, and the Gatorade was sold out. So I'm not out, but I got to be able to find it so I can buy it. But thank you. Thank you for supporting the channel. And let's see what else I've missed here in the chat room. Arnold says he misses the 750D Corsair Obsidian case. That was a nice case. I'm looking through the chat room. Martin says, unexpected potential issues rarely discussed. So yeah, referring to the title, I don't really see these YouTube content creators who build PCs mentioning having issues with parts that fit, or the amount of research they did to avoid it, or how many edits they did to the video where perhaps a part that they originally selected didn't work out and they had to replace it. And you'll never know in the final cut of the video because they don't show any of that. But I really don't see that discussed. And if it is discussed, it's not discussed often enough. when you pick the right parts that go together, it can save you a lot of money and save you a lot of time, and it can make your experience a wonderful, pleasant, enjoyable success. But if you're buying parts purely based on how they look, and you're willing to spend more for those looks, and you're willing to be frustrated getting them all to fit together, set your expectations accordingly, but don't mix them up. Don't think you're going to be able to do that and just pick things based on looks and then put them all together, and it's not going to be a problem. I can almost guarantee it's going to be a problem. I've dealt with it enough. I should know better. I think after this time, I think it's going to stay with me. I hope it'll stay with me, because I don't want to do that again. So I do believe that this case will be a nice case with the right motherboard in it. And the right motherboard is going to be one that isn't going to require liquid cooling. What else can I say about it? That means that the CPU is also not going to be a super high-end CPU. No more than an i7 in here, preferably an i5. We won't have any issues with requiring anything fancy for CPU cooling. The Mugen 5 will work to cool any CPU. The problem is when you really push the CPU hard over a period of time, that's when it makes or breaks a cooler. It's not the idle stuff for the web browsing. It's really when you're hammering on it that the heat gets generated. And just like a car, if it gets too hot, you can have all kinds of damage or shorten the lifespan of your parts. Now, when I say too hot, I'm talking about 90 degrees Celsius or above. If you're running below that, you're fine. There's no problem to solve. And generally speaking, you're only going to hit that if you're hammering the CPU hard over a period of time. So hammering the CPU for a few minutes would be normal usage. Maybe you're unpacking a large multi-gig zip file or RAR compressed file, and your CPU has to process it and extract it, and in that process your CPU usage is going to spike, your RAM usage is going to spike. It's going to extract that big file, and then your RAM and CPU usage go back down, and then your temps go back down. That's normal, expected use. Doesn't require anything excessive for the cooler. But if you're rendering out, you got a 3D printer and you're running 3D Fusion, or you're running AutoCAD or anything like that, you're doing any animation, then you're going to be hammering on the CPU and RAM and the GPU for a longer period, depending on the size of the render. That could go on for hours. In that case, having an adequate cooler for that environment, for that usage, is critical, or the machine's going to crash. You're going to lose your render job. You can start over again. So this case would hold a Mugen 5 with no problem, and maybe that's what we'll do. But it frustrates me to spend all that time to sort of force it all together, and then look at what I have to do yet to finish it. And I look at it and I'm like, it'll actually be less work for me to tear it all apart and use a larger case. At the end of the day, I need a larger case. Classic mistake. It's not something new. This has been going on for years, where people pick the wrong case, or they pick the wrong RAM, or they pick the wrong cooler, and things just don't fit right. So that's the lesson that I hope we can take from it, and not just don't buy these parts, they're bad. If the parts are paired up correctly, there's nothing wrong with them. So let me just look back through the chat here. But I'm just really mad at myself. I should have known better, and I shouldn't. As soon as that liquid cooler, as soon as I realized that wasn't going to fit, I should have just said, you know what? These parts don't go well together, and I don't want to force it. And I kind of feel like that would have been a failure on my part, right? That I would have started something I wasn't able to finish. If it was a recorded video, I would have scrapped it. You guys would have never seen it. But because it was live, I felt like I have to finish it. I've started it, now I have to. But there's no rule that says that's my pride, right? I didn't need to do that. And nor do you. If you get parts together for your build and things aren't fitting right, return them while you're still in your return period, and order a different part, even if it means you have to buy a new case. And so everything you did has to come back out of that case, and the case has to go back in its original packing and back in its original box for you to send it back. It's a lot of additional work, and it's going to delay how long it is before you're going to have a computer up and running. But better to do it right, even if it takes longer, than to just force it all to work, because it, I promise you, will be a never-ending problem. There's going to be something that happens to the computer, whether it's a part that fails or an upgrade you want to do. And it's going to make you grit your teeth at the thought of having to get back in there and take it partially apart so you can do something that, you know, like with RAM, you should be able to just pop the RAM in, no big deal. But if you've got to take the liquid cooler out first, and like I said, the liquid cooler is attached to everything, and everything's cable managed, so even when you take the liquid cooler out, it doesn't move because you've got your cable management so nice and neat, it's tight. You got to cut those loose without cutting through your cables, right? You got to cut those nylon zip ties loose, and then be very careful that the cooler doesn't fall and hit the board or, you know, damage the radiator. So you can put your RAM in and then put it all back together and redo the cable management. And it'll never end. As long as you keep those parts in that case, that combination, it's always going to revisit you for the entire time you own that computer. So rather than stretch that out over years, better that you pay the price early on by delaying your build by a couple days to send the case back, get the more appropriate case or the more appropriate cooler or whatever alternative it is that's going to fit well together, and that will reward you for years after that. You know, that you would have done it right to begin with. Jim says the thumbnail picture for today's video is top notch. Thanks, that's done by PhotoRay. PhotoRay did that thumbnail for me many years ago, and I felt it was appropriate for today's topic. Catherine Ann Hauserman said it's very hard to match white parts. Hardware Canucks made a video about it. Yeah, well, a lot of people will paint the parts themselves, which is another way you can go. You can repaint the case, and you can repaint the I/O shields and heat sinks. Well, I don't know that you want to paint a heat sink, but the plastic covers on the board, those you can repaint. But that is not where my talent lies. You don't want me painting anything. Everything will get painted. Let's see. Martin Wolfert says, I can vouch for that. I've got a 3900X development workstation, and it took me exchanging the CPU cooler 3 times until I found one that reliably kept the CPU temp below 80 Celsius under load. Ridiculous. It's not ridiculous if you're buying a top of the line, you know, the high-end consumer CPU. You've got to know the high-end consumer CPUs always run hot. There's never been a case in my memory of working on computers where whatever the flagship CPU was a hot chip. You know, that 9900 KS was a very difficult chip to keep cool under load. The 10900, the 11900, the 12900 is the worst of all of them. So, well, they made improvements in the 10th gen with the cooling. I thought, you know, that it was doing much better at not getting as hot as the 9th gen. Every generation of chip has their flagship. They've got their sort of top shelf, and that top shelf is going to be the one that draws the most power and generates the most heat. And that's always the way it's been. So if you're going to target that chip, then do expect it's going to need specialized cooling if you're going to run it under load on a regular basis, and that's of a concern. That one thing goes with the other, and to say it's ridiculous, well, it's not. It's exactly expected. That's why you should set your expectations reasonably. There's Mortant in the chat room. Welcome in, Mortant. And Bob Connors joins us. Zvi Manor says, is the rear case fan necessary in this build? No. In this build, it really isn't necessary, because anytime you've got fans at the top of the case exhausting air, then it's actually a detriment to also have another fan exhausting air in another direction. Because what it's doing is it's interrupting the airflow. So some of the air that should be going through this radiator is getting pulled out the back, and the air going through the radiator is cooling our CPU, and that's critical. The air blowing out the back isn't really doing anything but moving the air along. And where you would be concerned when you have a discrete graphics card is that you have a fan in the front of the case blowing air over the card, right? And this is not a high-end card, right? If we had a 3080 or 3090 in there, heck, any 30 series card, we'd want to have additional air blowing over the card from the front of the case. If we didn't have the liquid cooler in here, and we just had a traditional air cooler, then yes, we want the rear fan to help keep that air moving in one direction. If we don't have a graphics card, then we don't need the front case fan, but we definitely want the rear case fan. But if we have a liquid cooler, we don't want the rear case fan, because we've got the liquid cooler exhausting air from the top instead, for the reasons I've already given. And so this is the logic behind the fans. When you see people just throwing fans in willy-nilly with more is better, it isn't. Sometimes I've done that because they're all RGB and we're going for a certain aesthetic. You kind of have to pick one over the other. If you want the aesthetic, you're probably not going to have good airflow. It might be good, but it's not going to be optimal. Putting that many fans in is oftentimes detrimental to your airflow. But if it adds to the look you're going for and your CPU is running within its operational temperature range, so it's a little warmer, so what? Right? So we have to prioritize. Are the flashing lights and the aesthetic of the computer a higher priority than the performance of the computer, or in this case, of the temperature of the computer? Because the temperature doesn't really affect performance until it exceeds the operational. I want to say borders, but the limits between coldest and hottest. There's not really a coldest, but there's limits, and if you exceed those limits, it's going to impact the performance and the reliability of the machine. So that's an individual decision. One person might say, I don't care if it runs a little warmer, I really want it to look good. Maybe it's a showpiece. Maybe it's something you're taking to an expo and you want to use it to draw attention to your booth, something like that. Or maybe it's in the lobby of a company and your customers come in and you want them to see that. They're not looking at the temperature of the computer. It's more of a showpiece. It's like a piece of art. If you want both the piece of art and the performance and the cooling, well, it's going to take a lot of research and a lot of experimentation and a lot of money and a lot of time to get that all figured out, unless somebody's already done it on YouTube and you buy those exact parts where they've already done all the work. And because the parts change so often, a video like that would have to be made about once a year, because whatever board they're using probably isn't sold. Whatever CPU they use has probably been replaced by a newer evolution of the chip. Maybe the RAM they're using, we're on the verge of going to DDR5 now, for example. So if they're using, DDR4 in their build, but now it's all DDR5, the parts may not fit together the same. The RAM could be taller, could block the liquid cooler, all kinds of unexpected events could occur. So that's where we're differentiating, once again, hobbyists from professionals. In corporate America, generally speaking, all the computers in a business are going to be the same. And so as a computer technician, as a desktop support technician, if you work at a company like Intel and they've got 5 different buildings attached together with 5,000 employees in these buildings, or amongst the entire campus, that's a lot of desktops to support. And they don't generally hire too much staff where you're sitting around like the Maytag repairman waiting for the phone to ring. If anything, they're always a couple of employees short, so everybody's working extra hours. And the longer it takes you to get through your list of things to do today, potentially the later it is before you're going to get home from work. So ideally, you have all the machines be the same, or you have batches, right? So that 1 year we bought these machines from Dell, and then 1 year we bought these machines from Dell. So there's a couple of different models, but you'll familiarize yourself with them very quickly. You'll have all kinds of spare parts. You know exactly how things come apart, and you can get in and out very quickly once you've diagnosed the problem, right? And then that's where your skill comes in as a technician, to be able to diagnose quickly and accurately, so you're not going back and revisiting the same customer over and over again, because that's interrupting their productivity. Their manager's going to get mad that they're not able to work. They're going to blame you. They're probably going to talk to your boss and say, please send somebody else, this is taking too long. You know, it's a very different environment from sitting at home and watching YouTube videos and saying, I want to build something with all these pretty lights and liquid coolers and overclocking. None of that's done in corporate America. It's a very different mindset. And I don't know how much more I can convey that to you, but this is a great example. If we had an office and there were 200 of these deployed in the office, imagine how much time your IT staff would need to do any kind of upgrade or work. We're upgrading everybody from 16 gigs of RAM to 32 gigs. The company says everybody's got to have 32 gigs now. So now the IT department adds that on their list, that we have to visit every workstation, take out the RAM they've got now, and put in the 32, or add 16 more to what they have. Regardless, that liquid cooler's got to come out. And whatever time we're budgeting to hit 200 of these, plus the cost of the RAM, that cost of labor is going to balloon quickly. And before all 200 stations are going to be done, if these were just regular builds with like a typical Dell system, let's say, you'd open up the cover with one screw, sometimes not even a screw, a latch. You move a latch, the cover comes off. You've got to remove the glass panel, be careful not to scratch it. You pop the RAM in, you put the cover back on, it snaps in place. There's not even a screw to turn. You could probably do 15 or 20 of those before I could get one of these done. So you can understand that at scale, this doesn't work well. This is strictly a hobbyist activity. With a few exceptions, it is primarily a hobbyist thing to be using liquid coolers and RGB lighting and certainly overclocking. There are a few exceptions, but they're just that. That's not the norm in business. And for all those reasons that I've given you. So, all right, enough talk. Let me just undo all my hard work. But I figure if there can be any benefit from the lesson, it's don't do that. Or be careful before you start putting together an expensive build. You know, we've got a $550 CPU and a $270 motherboard with a $150 SSD with, you know, $150, $200 worth of RAM put into a $110 case with a $100 power supply and probably a $100, $150 cooler. So this isn't exactly bargain city here. This is all pretty much top shelf parts. The casing cooler, not so much, but the cooler cools like it's supposed to, and the case holds parts like it's supposed to, when it's built of good materials. It's just not well engineered from my perspective. I just want to look more in the chat room here before I start taking things apart. Chris's channel technology says you're just getting old. No, business hasn't changed, Chris. I mean, yes, everybody's getting old. I don't know any other direction life moves in. You're older than you were yesterday, the same as everybody else. But the needs of the IT department as a job, as an IT technician in a corporation, haven't changed. They haven't changed in 30 years. Michael Dane says, Carrie, check your PayPal. Use it for your pain fund for aspirin. All right, what did Michael send me? Let's take a look. Thank you, Michael. That's kind of you. I'm going to need something. I'm hoping this will just go away in a couple days. Let's see. There he is. Michael Dane sent $10. Hey, Michael, thank you for that. I appreciate you. Yeah, I try to avoid taking stuff, you know, but I try and push through. It really hurts. Anyway, I'll get over it. Carrie, could you have hurt your hand using the drill? The screwdriver? Yeah, I use the screwdriver a lot. I don't know how I don't know how I did it, so I don't know. I did something. Anything's possible. And Patrick Rousseau says, never build a computer on an empty tummy. That's pretty much every computer I built. Sting contributes $19.99. Thank you for that, Sting. Here I am complaining and my hand hurting, and I got King of Pain in there. Sinistar21 contributes $5 and says, nothing quite like having COVID and watching Carrie videos to recover. Well, hopefully I can keep you distracted for a while. Michael Dane says he did his latest build for a vet in his family for the school season. The total value is 100. Oh, the total given away of the number of computers Michael has given away is 110 that Michael has refurbished and given to people in his community. Carrie, do you have a video where you rank brands and what particular parts they do well? That's just covered in my videos. If you watch enough of my videos, you're going to keep seeing the same parts from the same brands. You'll see me use a lot of EVGA power supplies and EVGA GPUs. You'll see me use a lot of Corsair cases and RAM. You'll see me use a lot of Scythe coolers, Corsair coolers, NZXT coolers. You'll start to get a vibe by which parts I recommend by simply seeing which parts you see me use over and over and over again. If I keep going back and using the same particular motherboard or the same CPU or the same RAM or the same case, that's because those have proven to be a good value, that they've been available to buy. It doesn't matter how good of a price it is if they're not in stock, and that's been a big issue with cases. There was an NZXT power supply on sale today at Newegg. It might still be on sale. A C650 power supply from NZXT, $42. Now, the experience I've got with NZXT power supplies is pretty limited, but I've got those C750s, and those have been great power supplies. They have a 10-year warranty. They were about $135, fully modular. And based on my limited experience with those power supplies, I'm eager to looking forward to these more budget power supplies from NZXT. And $42 for a 650 watt power supply, and I don't care who makes it, that's a good price. I think they're 80 plus bronze rated too for energy efficiency. And I think Amazon limited me to buying 4. I couldn't buy any more than 4 of them. And then the next one down, I think, is a C550. It's 100 watts less, and it was another $5 more, but still a decent price, so I ordered 4 of those. So I got 8 power supplies coming, and those will be used probably in upcoming giveaway builds. And those are, if they're anything like the 750 watt power supply, they're really well made. They're quiet, they're designed well, and at $42, I mean, that's a limited sale price. So I don't know how long that's going to be available, but if you're in the market for a power supply, the thing about buying computer parts, a lot of times they go obsolete or they start depreciating in value relatively soon after you buy them. But not so with cases and power supplies. Those are things you can buy and stick them in a closet for the day you need it. But you wouldn't want to do that with a motherboard, RAM, or CPU or storage, in my opinion. Don Allen contributes $10. Hey, thanks again, Don. I appreciate you. He says, your Gatorade is getting empty again. Yeah, it's almost time. Almost time for a new one. Bob Connor says it takes a big man to admit mistakes publicly and take action publicly to fix that. Well, this isn't about my ego. This is about teaching. So if a teacher makes a mistake in front of the students, I think it's really important for the teacher to admit that and explain how the mistake was made and how somebody with experience who's supposed to know better can also make a mistake just as easily as someone who doesn't know better, and that everybody can benefit from it so that that same mistake isn't repeated by the students. For a teacher to call themselves a teacher but then not teach based on their own experiences, but to just teach based on, let's say, past experience. But what about current? What about something you did today or something you did in front of the students that upon reflection could have been done better? That is a teaching moment if there ever was one. So it's not about being a big person. It's about being true to the concept of teaching. So unless what I'm trying to teach is how wonderful I am, right, then that's irrelevant. The point of the lesson is being able to put some gravity behind the words, because we can talk all day about what could happen or what might happen. We can talk about what should happen. But when something actually happens right in front of us and it goes sideways, if we can take a minute as a teacher and analyze it and say, where did it go wrong and how could we have done it differently? It's not just something I do to students. I wouldn't say to a student, for example, let me embarrass you and show your mistake to everybody, because that's my goal. My goal is, let's take this as a learning moment. It has nothing to do with you as a person, but I think that by letting everybody know about it, and this is how it can go sideways, right? If you're doing it to other people. I say, okay, students, what did he do wrong? It's not to belittle that person. It's to say, see how easy it is to get it wrong. Do you see how somebody, your peer sitting next to you, listening to the same lesson, misinterpreted, and see the results and what it caused? So let's use that as our motivation to understand how serious this is, to not repeat that mistake. But I should be held to the same standard. So if I have done something incorrectly and I'm made aware of it where it's still relevant, I definitely want to draw attention to that so that we can all learn from it together, because to do anything else means that I'm showboating or I'm showing off and I'm not teaching. I make mistakes every day, every single day. And they're usually minor things, like I put something down and I can't remember where I put it, or I've grabbed the wrong part. So they're not a big deal. I just grabbed the right part and, so what? But when it starts to have a domino effect and it just escalates and escalates into, a completely different attitude and disposition where it gets emotional and in a negative way, then I'm doing something wrong, because this should be fun. So how did it stop being fun? And it stopped being fun the minute that I focused more on aesthetics than on part compatibility. And it stopped being fun when my stubborn pride made sure I was going to finish what I started. And that is probably the biggest mistake that I made, is just not stopping in the moment and saying, you know what? I could make this work, but I don't want to. I don't want to work that hard, and I shouldn't have to. And rather than cursing out the parts, I should have just said, these parts are individually fine, but together it's a hot mess. And yeah, if I had to do it over again, that's what I would have done. And I don't think that's much different from anybody else, right? And especially if a camera's on you and you've got 500 people watching you live, there's a bit of pressure. There's some expectation, and there's a bit of, I'll prove to you I can make it work. I shouldn't have to prove myself to anybody. If I tell you I can make it work and I just don't want to, I'm not coming up with an excuse. I'm literally just don't want to have to prove myself. But for whatever reason, that was my mindset yesterday, and I was going to see it through. And well, it didn't end well. The computer works and everything's fine, but I don't want to go through any more work on this to make this look good. It's too much. And I don't want to have to deal with after the sale issues if they come up that, you know, I'm going to have to cover that under warranty, and I don't want to. If I just simply put a different motherboard in this and not use a liquid cooler, it won't be any different than any other build. It's really not a big deal. But stubbornly forcing them all those parts to work together became a big deal. And it's only going to get worse. It's not going to go away unless I change the parts. Andy Kane contributes €5, and he says, that's just because. Thank you, Carrie. Hey, thank you, Andy. Appreciate your support. Markello says, Carrie, you should write a book on Carrie's topics of wisdom. A lot of people out there would benefit from what you say here. Good life lessons. Well, thank you, Markello. I don't think many people read books anymore, but we'll do that in my spare time. I'm not so busy. The goat says, this Be Quiet system getting rebuilt, or are you selling it the way it is? I'm taking it apart. Yeah, I'm not going to sell it like that. We have a windy day outside. Boy, is it. It is windy out there. The good news is that the temperature is cooler, so there's that. Okay, I think I'm all caught up on the comments and I can start my disassembly. Disassembly should happen quickly. Getting things put together and fitting together, it takes more time. But taking things apart, at least for me, this should all come apart in 10 minutes. Let's start with the graphics card. Now, by keeping the Windows 10 on there, on that solid state drive, I won't have to reinstall it again because we're only going to move the motherboard to a new case. We won't have to redo all of the installation and configuration of the operating system. That's already been done and updated. Thank goodness, by keeping the solid state drive paired with that motherboard, won't have to revisit that. As for the cooler, keeping this cooler attached to that motherboard will also save time when moving it to another case. And then I'll just have to deal, once again, with the fan speed in the BIOS. Okay, video card is out. I also have this little plastic cover to put back on over the USB 3 pins on the bottom of the board. I wasn't quite sure which direction the notch, if it faced down or up. But another little trick is to just look at all of the other connectors on the board, and all the notches on this board face downwards. So all you have to do is match it so that they're all in the same direction. You don't have to analyze which one's pin 1. You don't have to get all technical with it. So it's delicate, but it's easy to put that back on. You just gotta make sure you fit all the pins through those little holes, and it'll seat right back down. So all of the front port umbilicals, which on this one there's only 2, right? The power LED and power switch. The rest of these are fans and the ARGB header off of the front cover of the case, which we didn't even install any RGB software, so that we didn't even get that far. And then we have our audio headphone and microphone jack here that's plugged in. And then up here we've got that USB 3.1 and our big power module here. That's the USB 3.1, and so that frees all of this up, but we still have that power connector back here I can't get to because the cooler's in the way. So we'll go ahead and take the cooler off now. And this is kind of difficult to get to at this angle. And thank goodness I've got a power screwdriver to do this, because there's a lot of screws that would take a while to turn by hand. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out the 2 corner screws so that there's not a lot of weight hanging off one corner. Because when we get down to that last screw, without an extra person to hold this, it could fall. So what I'm going to do is put a hand underneath of it when I take the last screw out, and then bring this down in a controlled manner. And now I can let that hang just like that, and then I can take this screw and put it away. Now I can reach up here and grab that other power supply, the CPU power connector coming off the power supply. Push that out the back. And as for these 2 fans, those have to be unplugged so that we can remove more of the radiator away so that we can have access to the board to remove it. So just coming around the back, we're going to unplug. I guess I can just leave those plugged into the splitter and push that out through the front. But you'll see how fast this will come apart. And this is, up here at the top, we've got our liquid pump connector and RGB for the pump, or the water block rather. And so these hoses are going to stay connected, and this is what I say, it's kind of a delicate thing to do, because when we take the board out now, we've got this anchor attached to it. So when I take the last screw out, the board's gonna want to fall to the floor. And when I grab it and I start to pull it out, I also have to use my other hand and hold this, and then I can gently set this on top of the board, putting it somewhere away from any sort of conductive area. I don't want to set it on a metal table, for example, unless I've got some cardboard down or something to insulate it. So I just want to get all these little cables I've detached out of the way so they don't snag. And yeah, I should be able to take the motherboard out now. So once again, I don't want to leave the last screws at the bottom, because what will happen is it'll be top heavy and you can crack the board in half or break a piece of the board off. So since we're top heavy, we'll leave maybe that middle screw right there at the top, and we'll take out everything else without having to worry about the motherboard falling out. And then if the motherboard falls out, then it's going to hit the floor with the radiator and then smack into the radiator, damaging, more than likely it could damage the RAM, any circuitry on the board, and the radiator itself. And that would be devastating. Now, it'd be no big deal to take the cooler off properly. I just don't want to. Don't want to. And I want to make sure I don't confuse these screws with those screws. These are the motherboard mounting screws, and then these screws are for the radiator and the cooler. So I'm going to make 2 separate piles for that. So there is no screw in the middle here, but we do have one at the top. So we'll go ahead and take all these screws across the bottom and middle out, and then each top corner. And that's going to leave just one screw holding everything in. Okay, so when I take the last screw out, as I mentioned, the board's going to want to fall forward with gravity. So I want to make sure that I'm either holding the radiator or I've got it sitting somewhere where it can't fall. So if I move this back onto the Lazy Susan a little further back, that should give me a nice resting area there. And then I should be able to go in here, take this last screw out, and I'm going to put my hand over the water block and the heat sink here and very gently remove it just to see if it starts coming out on its own. This board, because of this I/O shield here, this board has to come out where the back has to come out, and then you got to slide the board back towards towards the front of the case on an angle to get the I/O shield out from around that fan. So that's kind of saving us right now from that stress. So it's more controlled of a removal process. Hey, I see Ron Hilliard's in the chat room. Hey, Ron. All right, so if I pull the back of the board towards you guys, and then I'm going to, once I've removed it on an angle, so right now the board's sitting with the back out, but the front is still tucked in right here, then I want to slide it back, which in this case is, I suppose, sliding it front, right, because it's going towards the front of the case. Feels like there's a cable attached somewhere. Something's holding me up. See, that I/O shield, or this I/O cover rather, makes this a very tight fit. Which would be easier if I took that fan out. But again, how often do you ever see me have to remove a fan to put a motherboard in or out? So it just becomes more labor intensive, and if I don't have to do that on most builds, then I don't want to do it on any builds, unless, as I mentioned before, the cases of some unique design that would require that to meet a certain footprint. You see now the board's kind of jammed in, it's kind of stuck in these holes in the shroud for the power supply, and so what I have to do is very gently kind of lift up on the board. If you stress the board too much, this is a multi-layered board. There could be 10 layers of circuitry in here. So if you cause it to crack, you may not visibly see anything, but you could be breaking traces on the multiple levels of circuitry on the board. But we're having some trouble getting this thing to free up where that I/O shield is really caught up in that fan. And the smart thing to do would be to take the fan out. But I figure I put it in with the fan in, I should be able to take it out. And that's that stubbornness again. And that fan is causing us the grief because of the I/O cover. And apparently I've cut myself. Yeah. So now I've got blood on it. Okay. So this is like just the injury machine here. This thing is like my arch nemesis. Okay, now that I've actually injured myself for real, I think I'll take the fan out now. I know if I continually, be stubborn about it, I will get it out, but I might injure myself some more, and I'm already feeling beat up. And that looks like a nice gouge I just gave myself into my thumb. Well, it's going to be Band-Aid time here in just a second because I don't want to get blood all over everything. It just stinks. I should be able to pull that board straight out of there. I might have to get something on this. I'm afraid I'm going to get blood on it. It doesn't hurt. Not yet, but it's just messy. So let me go put something on that. Let me rinse it off real quick. I'll be right back. Sometimes people ask me what tools they should buy. They're going to go into being a computer technician, and they want to know what are the things I should have in my toolbox. And I'll always tell you, Band-Aids. A lot of technicians won't mention it. But if you ask them, you know, oh, this is the kind of screwdriver, and these are the kind of pliers and wire cutters and zip ties and hex nut screws and spare screws and flash drives and utilities that I have in my toolbox, ask them, would it be ideal to have Band-Aids in your toolbox? And I will bet you they'll probably say, oh yeah, I have a box of Band-Aids in my toolbox. If they're a real tech, that's how you can tell, in my opinion. Apply a tourniquet. Yeah, around my neck. All right. That's the way your dad fixes boo-boos right there. Just a sanitary lick. And I've got blood on the box. That's great. There, clean that up. It's gross. All right. Set these Band-Aids aside. Keep them close by. Might not be done with them yet. The case is putting up a fight. It's not the case, really. It kind of is and it kind of isn't. It's the motherboard and the fan that are putting up the fight. But yes, if the case was designed a bit more generously with space, the motherboard wouldn't be interfering with the fan. On the other hand, if the motherboard didn't have the I/O cover on it, then it also wouldn't be interfering. It's just a combination of, you know, again, the parts being used in a different case would probably be just fine. It's hard to point the blame. Hey, there's $10 from Mati. Hey, thank you, Mati. And Gary Tatum contributes $20 for the Band-Aid fund. Let's hope I don't need that many Band-Aids, okay? Otherwise, there's going to be a blood donor fund if that keeps up. Let's see. Frank wants to know what happened to my GPU removal tool. I've got it right here. The GPU removal tool. I just haven't had any computers come in with GPUs that have been difficult to remove, or they didn't have GPUs. Most of them don't have GPUs. This one I could just reach in and hit the lever. Usually where I run into problems is if there's a big GPU and a giant air cooler. If it's a liquid cooler, the GPUs are usually, the release levers are easy to reach, usually. But thank you, Gary. And thank you for the question, Frank. Johnny 5 says, no disassemble. There's a dated reference. All right, let's keep going. My concern now is if I take the fan out that the board will in fact fall now. That's the only thing holding it in. So I'm having second thoughts of this fan should have come out first. But now that I'm already 5/6 of the way out, I've got a shield on my thumb now, so it's not like I can go through the Band-Aid and do it again. Or can I? Got it. And let me just get my blood off of there, because that's gross. Okay, so how I handle this now, I've got to support the main board and the radiator. It's pretty heavy. And I'm going to set it aside, and I'm going to gently place the radiator basically across the top of that I/O cover water block in the top of the RAM, because there's nothing that will protrude and hit the radiator fins, and there's no electrical connections that could be shorted out. So I'm going to set that over here, preferably on a cardboard box. So again, we don't have any, what's the word I want? Anything conductive. The cardboard is a non-conductive surface. And it looks like if I just take the case box and lay it sideways, see if I can pick it up and I'll show you. It looks like there's enough hose on the radiator that it can sit alongside the board rather than on top of the board as I was originally thinking. But there's a corner of it that's laying on top of the board, and that's metal on metal, and we don't want that. So I'm going to set it back down and move it aside so we don't cause any harm to that board or the radiator. So that's the downside of keeping things connected, so you don't have to go through the effort of reattaching that heatsink in the future or the water block in the future. But in the meantime, you've got to be careful on how you handle it. And I'll set the video card over with that because that'll go into a different case. I think a 4000D would be more appropriate for that board and that liquid cooler. And then I also want to make sure that we have all 8 screws for that radiator. And I want to put that into a little Ziploc bag. I don't want to confuse the motherboard mounting screws with the radiator screws. They're a different type of thread. And then that'll make a bad situation worse. Because once you strip out the screws and the radiator, well, you're pretty much going to be in the market for a new radiator. Okay. And then this little USB 3.0 piece for the plug, I'm going to put that over by the board so I don't forget to reattach that before I reinstall the board. In fact, I could probably just slide it on there right now. It can be difficult to line up. If you're 1 pin off and you bend those pins, they have to be perfectly straight or this thing won't seat. And things can go bad. It'd be very difficult to straighten that back out after it's been bent. So I am off the frame of the camera right now as I'm trying to align that little plastic cover. There it goes. And then that's seated back down. If that continually comes off, you can use a little hot melt glue from a hot melt glue gun and glue it down, but it feels like it's on there tight. And the only time it'll be a problem is if we're disconnecting the USB 3 plug, and the USB 3 plug that's on this case fit in there tight, but they all don't fit in tight. Some fit in looser than others, so it may not be an issue we have to address in a different case. I also don't want to reuse this power supply. I want to reuse the power supply with that motherboard. I think it's a good pairing, but I don't want to use it in the build I'm going to be putting in this case today, because we don't need anything this fancy for the motherboard I'm going to put in here. Okay, this has got to come out through here. This one will have to come out through there as well. That was the power for the GPU. And then I can slide this completely out. And I have to unplug the SATA power cable from the front RGB. And everything else should just be pulling the cables through. Now I could unplug the cables from the back of the power supply, but given that these are all the same cables we're going to need plugged into where I need them plugged in, my preference is to just leave them, as messy as it is. Then I don't lose them, I can keep them all together, and it's already set up. So when I put it into a different case with that motherboard, it's got every connector we're going to need, except maybe that SATA power connector, because the 4000D shouldn't require that. But nor should a Pure Base 600. So I guess it took a little longer than 10 minutes to take it apart because I had to be handling some of those parts very gingerly, but still a lot faster to take it apart than it was to put it together. I'll keep the power supply next to the motherboard and GPU, so that'll all be going together into another build, maybe later this week if I have time. So our motherboard mounting screws, power supply screws, and then power supply frame screws there. Okay. Wait, those aren't power supply frame screws, are they? Oh, these are the GPU. Okay, these screws go over here. I'm not going to put a GPU in this, so I'm going to put the slot covers back in it. We'll get those out of the way. It'll be one less thing I got to worry about later. Put those back on. Bring the torque back down to where it should be. Yeah, this whole piece here, oops, makes getting those in more difficult than it should be. And you won't see me struggle with that on other case designs, because other case designs, I generally avoid cases that have that kind of an external mounting place for the PCI slot covers or PCI cards. I prefer them for these screws to be on the inside of the case. And that only happens if they make the case too short. Again, another inch or 2 inches would have more than covered that and made this less convoluted to work on. And it's not the end of the world. It's not the worst thing. You know, it's not the hardest challenge to overcome. It just doesn't scale well. And if you've learned one thing about me, it's all about scale. Your business can't grow if you can't scale. So that means if you insist on a specific design that takes more labor, then you've limited how much money you can make in a day, and that's your own fault. Or it's your own reward, as the case may be, if you don't mind making less money. Or the amount of money you make will never be more, and you're okay with that. I'm not okay with it. I want to keep growing. I want to keep expanding, and I want to help more people, and I can't do that if I'm limited by, requiring. If each customer requires, let's say, 4 hours of time, and there's 8 hours in a workday, then I can only help 2 customers a day. If there's a way I can bring that down to 2 hours, I can double the number of customers that I can help in 8 hours, and therefore can double my salary. But there is a limit to how many hours there are in a day, but I would want to make the most out of those. And then, if necessary, hire people. But the minute I hire people, I lose control of my the emphasis I put on my quality. If I have to go back and inspect everybody's work, it's less efficient. So anyway, pros and cons of growing and expanding. All right, let's put a regular power supply in this. I've got a couple sitting here. What do I have? I've got an EVGA 500 watt power supply right here. Is this extra? No, let's use this one. Here's a Aries game. This is a $28 power supply. It's a budget power supply. And we'll put a budget motherboard in here. And for some reason, Be Quiet thinks that's a budget case. Based on its design, I can agree with it. But based on its build quality, the build quality is more in line with a premium case. So you can understand my confusion. Which is it? I don't think it's going in straight. Look at that in a minute. I better get my glasses on because I'm having a hard time seeing those mounting holes. That one went in fine. Okay, so it's just this one giving me grief. Nothing a little more torque can't fix. There it goes. And then I'm going to just manually tighten those down a little bit more. Perfect. We'll come around to the back. And with the frame on the power supply, we can slide the power supply in. Got to get all those cables in there first. It's interesting that this side is upside down. I'm sure the other side is right side up, but you won't be able to see it with the shroud, but it leaves this writing upside down, which is an odd choice. Normally the fan would be facing down during a power supply install. As I've got it, that should be the default, and so why the manufacturer puts the writing upside down on it seems like an odd choice, but probably something a customer would never pay attention to anyway. But, you know, it's a $28 power supply, so. Set your expectations accordingly is all I'm saying. Okay. All about expectations, folks. Generally speaking, the more money you spend, the higher expectations are, and the less forgiving they are. Generally, at least that's how I am. Okay. So what am I going to do for a motherboard? I have some boards that are 8th and 9th gen boards that are just sitting waiting to be given away to people. And I think this would be a great case to house one of those. Here we go. This one right here. This would be a good example of that. So here we've got the I/O shield. All that stuff's for the cooler. Set that over here for now. So here we've got a B365M motherboard. It's got an HDMI out, DVI, and VGA out, 2 USB 2s, 4 USB 3s, plus the USB 3 header. There's not going to be USB 3.1 on a board this old, so we won't hook up the 3.1, but we're only got the one USB 3 header on the connector on the front of the case anyway. And it should have Windows, and no, it's not going to have Windows installed. This doesn't have an M.2 drive, so we'll have to use a 2.5-inch solid state drive and plug it into one of the SATA connectors. But it's fine for Windows 10. I don't know that it'll work with Windows 11. It might. This is an 8th or a 9th gen Intel CPU, I can't remember. And we're going to have to adjust the motherboard standoffs to fit the smaller board mounting layout. So I'm going to lay the case flat, sitting on top of those power supply cables. And I'm going to gently set the board in position here and look to see which of the standoffs have to be moved. It looks like, from a casual glance, there's a, I'm leaning against my keyboard. Give me a second here, I've got to fix this little window that popped up. Okay. Yeah, so there's two standoffs that have to be moved. The two standoffs across the bottom of the case need to be moved up to the next available mounting hole. And then I'm going to do that real quick and then show you what that looks like. And of course, I've got to put the I/O shield in, but I didn't want that in my way, so I could just quickly determine where those... well, I can bring this up on its feet and show you where those standoffs have to get moved to. So this is, again, it's going to be a bit distant from the camera for you to see, but I have a 5mm socket specifically for this job. And I got this as a little kit from Harbor Freight Tools. You get this ratcheting driver and this little fabric bit holder. And in here is a very narrow 5mm socket. It's the one tool that's missing out of this. And I don't really use any of these other bits. That just sits in there for some rainy day. I just have the 5mm socket put in there. And this socket, unfortunately, doesn't have a notch in it, which means that if I put it into my power driver, you see on these bits, they've got a notch in them. And there's a little detent, a ball detent, and when you plug that in, it holds onto it. Without that little notch, there's nothing to hold this in. You see how far down it goes? So it makes it very hard to use. And then when I pull the driver, this usually comes right out with it. So when I'm looking for bits for my electric driver, I always look to make sure they have that little carve out like this does. And then it locks the bit in, and I have to lift up on the chuck to release it. So this, with being a smaller ratcheting driver with the bits that come with it, it doesn't sit so deep inside. You see how much more of it sticks out? And it actually holds onto it magnetically versus this one, which requires the ball detent to do that. So I want to make sure we're on lefties loosies, righties tighties. We want to loosen out the two we've got, the two on the bottom here. So we start at that bottom corner. We'll take that one out and move it up here to the next available hole. Switch this over to righties tighties, and we'll go ahead and tighten that down. Now you want these tight enough that when you tighten screws into them, when you put your motherboard on, you don't want them so loose that when you go to unscrew that screw to take the board out, that it ends up backing off the standoff with it. That's really frustrating. Now, some micro ATX boards have another screw right here, but this case, I'm noticing just now, does not have any consideration for that. Thankfully, the more common layout is with this bolt, or this hole here, that's slightly further down. You see these aren't aligned. This is up higher than this one. And on some micro ATX cases, you see the distance between these two? That would be the same over here, but there's no consideration for that. But in our case, that's going to work out because the motherboard we're going to use happens to have that more common layout. But most cases that I work on, you will notice right in here there'll be two holes. On the other hand, that makes this super easy to configure because you don't really have any choice. Unless you've got a motherboard that has the mounting point up here, in which case you'll not use it. So I tighten those up just a little bit beyond snug, but if you over tighten them, they will strip out, and there's nothing you can do at that point. Maybe you could get some Loctite or something, but you'd be in a world of hurt because that's the case. It's not like you can just replace the motherboard tray in the case. Some cases you can, but not this one. Now with those standoffs in the proper position, I can put the I/O shield in. Like so. And we'll lay the case flat again so I can put the board in. Once again, if we align it with the center mounting post, it should go through the center mounting hole of the board and hold the board in position for us. And it does. But I've made another misjudgment here, and I'm going to show that to you. Remember how I mentioned the case doesn't have the mounting hole for motherboards that have the different mounting position, and I didn't have to worry about it with this motherboard? I do have to worry about it with this motherboard. I looked at it too quickly, and I'm going to put one screw in just to hold the board in, and I'm going to show you. Okay, so I want to make sure we got a little bulge here. I don't know why that's happening. But let me just lift this up and show you what I'm talking about. So that's the standoff we put in right there. And right there is the mounting hole. So that mounting hole and this mounting hole are exactly aligned. And on some and most micro ATX, this one is higher up. And so this motherboard, or this case rather, doesn't give us a hole here. If you look at the other side, we're coming through you can see where the mounting holes are, and we don't have one below this. See that? So this case falls short there. See how I thought I was going to run out of frustrations if I put the right board, but this still isn't the right board for this case. Now that screw is not critical. We can leave that. I can put a little plastic standoff behind it because the hole above it is just the post. So if I want to, I can remove the post and actually put a standoff that I can secure down. Or I can pick a different motherboard that maybe has a different layout. So putting the right parts together is definitely going to impact whether or not you have a good time with your build. I can tell you that definitively. Let me see what else I have here that might have that different layout. Yeah, this has a different layout. Okay. We're going to keep switching it up, folks, until we get it right. And that's what happens when you don't do any research on your parts and you're using new parts you're not familiar with. This is an MSI motor motherboard. It's still like a B365, the same as this one. And this one I've already got a CPU and NVMe, which the other one does not. Wait a minute, now I'm confused. If that's a B365, that must not be a B365 if it doesn't have NVMe on it. It does have NVMe on it. It's just there was nothing in it. Okay, phew. I was thinking maybe this was like a 6th gen board or something. Anyway, so what I'm going to do instead now is we're going to switch to this motherboard. Now this one you'll see has a lot more mounting holes. It's slightly larger. It's longer, as you can see. So we're going to use these standoffs all the way at the edge. Just these two, because it's still going to drop off at about the same cutoff. It'll go a little bit lower. As you can see from the mounting holes, you see this mounting hole here. If we went directly across, that would be right there. That's the way the motherboard that's in there now is designed. But this mounting hole here, if you go straight across, there's a heat sink here. And so you'll see the mounting hole that's at the bottom is lower in position than this one here. And the board we're using now uses the alternative MATX standard layout where the screw matches in height to the screw on the opposite side. So in this case, we can keep the metal post going through the center. We can secure with 3 screws across the top, 1, 2 across the bottom, and 1 and 2 across the middle with the center post holding it in position for us. That'll be a better, more secure mounting technique, and the I/O shield is already built onto this board. So this is the ideal board for this case. Now, how often, if you've been watching my videos, have you seen me had an issue putting any motherboard into any case? This rarely happens. And when it does happen, it's happening with the budget parts. So be aware of that. And, you know, set your expectations accordingly. That's all I'm trying to tell you. I'm not trying to tell you which way you should do it. I just want you to know, if you're going to take this route, this is the scenery you should expect, or the obstacles in your path. And if you go this route, it might cost you a little bit more, but those obstacles are, generally speaking, non-existent. Now, we will have to put a heatsink, and we'll have to put RAM in there. And we're better off doing that now, at least the heatsink part, than after we install, in my opinion. So does anybody have any questions about this little run-in that we've got right now? I don't think I'm missing any questions that have been asked. If so, please ask it again. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat room. Motherboards, just because it's a certain chipset doesn't mean it automatically has a certain motherboard mounting screw layout. With Micro ATX, there are 2 standards. Well, there's actually about 3 standards. This Micro ATX board is longer than most. The Micro ATX standard affects the range of the length and the width of the board, and the longer the board is, the more screws it's going to need either way, length or width. So there's 3 different sizes, as far as I know, of Micro ATX boards that fall within the Micro ATX descriptor, and that defines where the mounting holes are, and the case then isn't fully Micro ATX compliant. It's only somewhat Micro ATX compliant because it's missing that mounting point I need to mount this board. So I'm going to take this board back out and we'll put this board in it. So we're back at it again. Now, what would a regular home user do? They wouldn't have spare boards laying around like me to do this. And that's where your time comes into investigating which parts are going to fit into which case, or replicate a build part for part that you see somebody else building with. So that if you follow all the same ingredients and follow all the same steps, you should get the same result and no surprises. It's when you deviate, that's when the surprises are going to appear if you don't do proper compatibility checks, and that can take a while to research. I can't find the screw I put in. It's in here somewhere. There it is. Okay. So this comes back out along with the I/O shield. And this will go back on the shelf, waiting for a home. My little foster motherboard there, waiting to be adopted. Set that there. Which board is this? It is a B365. See, so here we go. We've got 2 B365 boards with different mounting. This is a B365 as well. And it has 3 of the holes are in different positions. And it's got, well, one hole in a different position and then two holes where that board doesn't have any because the board's not as long, as I've already demonstrated. Arnold wants to know, what other components will you add to this build? It won't need anything else. Once this board is propagated with RAM and a cooler, with that power supply, it's got integrated graphics and it won't need anything else. At that point, it's done. Yeah. Let me grab a fresh Gatorade here and we'll start the process of installing the third motherboard with the hopes that it'll fit. And I hope Be Quiet sees this video and acknowledges and hopefully addresses this limitation of micro ATX. It's just a drill. It's just a hole they need to drill to make it compatible. And it's kind of makes it hard to believe they don't have that when it's so effortless and doesn't really add to the cost of manufacturing at all. And I wouldn't have known that if I stubbornly forced the other board and I'm reviewing the case as a result, and I'm saying all these negative things about the case. Come to find out there's even other negatives that I would have missed. And that lack of a mounting hole is a pretty big deal when you only have a couple of screws holding in a smaller board. Each screw is more important. That's why I said I'd probably take the center post out, unscrew that. But on some cases, you can't unscrew the center post. On some of the Corsair cases, the standoffs are in a fixed position, some of them, and you can only move a couple that are variable. And I think the center post is one that can't be removed on a lot of Corsair cases. But I also know the Corsair cases accommodate for that other mounting hole, so it's not an issue. But I think what I want to do right now is we need to put a cooler on here, and I have to figure out which cooler. First, let's see what CPU we've got on here. We've got a 512 gig Gen 3x4 NVMe drive from T-Force, and this is an Intel Core i7 9700K, really? That's a pretty nice CPU. Okay, well that's going to be a rocket ship. Doesn't look like much though, does it? Let me move this out of the way so we have some space to work. And I think the Mugen 5 will probably be a good choice here. The Greek has contributed $10. Thank you, the Greek. So I've got my isopropyl alcohol, 99% pure alcohol there. And you want to use the highest alcohol content when you're using it as a cleaner, especially with electronics. It leaves less residue behind and it evaporates quicker. And we'll get that nice and drenched. It's just got dust on it, really. It's been sitting on a shelf collecting dust. Okay, so that's good to go. Now, what do we want to use for a cooler? We definitely want to use a Tower air cooler. I think I've got some from Be Quiet that I haven't used yet. And since it is a Be Quiet case, maybe we should use, let's see, we've got a Be Quiet Pure Rock Slim 2 and a Pure Rock 2. The Pure Rock Slim is silver. That's not going to match the colors. See how the whole thing of color matching really gets expensive and tiresome of trying to find parts that fit and look aesthetically pleasing because we've got that glass side panel to consider. So here's a Pure Rock 2. And I think that'll be a good fit for this board. Captain Blinsky with a $2 contribution says, oh, that's Dave Coleman. Oh, that's who Dave Coleman is. All right. Thank you, Dave. Rick Lakes contributes $5 and says, hello. Hey, Rick. Thank you, my friend. Yeah, thank you, William. If you like the video, be sure and give it a thumbs up, which looks like that. Just give it a click. And if you haven't, go ahead and subscribe. Hit the red subscribe button, and then that will make you aware anytime I post new content. So you don't have to wonder, is there any new content? I want to move that subscribe button. Let's see. Oh, that's better. Yeah. And then hit the bell icon to turn on notifications. And make sure you go into your YouTube settings. If it's on your phone, go to your YouTube settings on your phone. Or in your desktop, go to the top right corner where your name is. And go to the settings to turn notifications on and how you want to be notified. Okay. Hey, there's $20 coming in from Madi. Thanks again, Madi. Yeah, so this is the Pure Rock 2. This is a 550 watt TDP cooler. It should be very similar to the Scythe Mugen 5 in many ways. I did use one of these a while back when Be Quiet sent them to me, and it's a decent cooler. I was really liking the Noctua, then the Scythe, and then the Be Quiet in that order. And then Noctua changed their mounting technique to be compatible with socket 1700. That ruined the Noctua for me. They took something that was simple and they made it complicated. And they charge a lot of money. Noctua was the most expensive and the most difficult cooler to install when it was the easiest. So Noctua was off my list. I'm not using them anymore. They didn't even change any packaging to alert you to the fact that it had changed. They were charging the same price. And I had ordered a bunch of coolers, same cooler, installed them and wanted to order some more, and then the next batch I got were all the different mounting technique, and I sent them all back except for the one I used, and I'm done with them. I'm so angry at that. There should have been something on the packaging that indicated a change was made, because the Amazon page was the same, the box was the same, the price was the same, so to me it was real sneaky for them to do it like that. So what that means is Scythe went back to the -- position, with Be Quiet now in the 2nd position for price, effectiveness, and ease of installation. And the heatsink's a bit smaller than the Scythe. It's more along the line of the Hyper 212 Evo size, or even the Noctua's size, the U12S. There's our single fan. Be Quiet always does a good job with their fans. And then we've got our mounting hardware and our mounting instructions, and that should be good to go. Looks like we've got thermal compound already applied here, which is a nice touch. Interestingly, the thing that's supposed to protect the thermal compound has obviously made contact with it, leaving those little indents, but it won't make any difference because that's all going to melt when the CPU gets hot. And then the rest of the box is empty. Danny Naranjo contributes $10 and said he wanted to join the fun. Well, thank you. There's plenty of room for you to join in on the fun. Appreciate you, and I appreciate your support. And we'll make sure you are also blue in here. Oh, you already are, Danny. So thank you. Okay, so here we've got mounting hardware. These are the fan hangers. They give you 2 sets in case you want to put another fan on the other side, but they only give you 1 fan, and you really only need 1 fan. Okay. So this is the what they call it. It's like a bracing bar. It's going to go under here. This is already attached in the Scythe cooler. It's just an added step. It's not a big deal. Then you've got our AMD mounting parts, which we don't need. And this is our Intel mounting parts, and that's going to be for all Intel sockets. We don't have all Intel sockets. We just have one. So there's going to be spare parts in here we won't need as well. I like that Be Quiet gives us a metal back plate. But unlike Scythe, you have to put the screws into the proper holes, whereas the Scythe, that's already done and you slide it in for certain socket types like what we're using today. Header Ram 560 says, hello, Carrie in chat. Hey, welcome in. Thanks for joining us today. Now, all those are Ziplocs, and this is a sealed bag. I don't know why it's sealed, but I've got to get my scissors to cut it open. Something that really bothers me when things aren't consistent, and I don't know what it is, but it just gets under my skin, that they just don't pick one way and stick with it. But as far as complaints go, it's a very minor complaint. All right. Now, looking at the screws that just came out of this bag, sorry, I had to just throw that away. Let's see, let's get the glasses out here. More than likely, so we have a taller thumb screw and a shorter one. And we're going to use one or the other and not both. And then we've also got some little rubber washers here. So let me take a look at the directions because I can't remember how I used to do this. These directions look pretty straightforward, which is a welcomed sign. It looks like the socket 2011 and 2066 use these shorter, what are they calling these? It's probably on the parts list. Spacer nuts. So we're not going to use the short ones. Those are for socket 2066 or 2011. So up here, it's LGA 1150, 1151, 1155. That's what we've got here, 1151. And 1151, the mounting hole is on the inside of the bracket. So on this bracket, there are two positions for the screws to go in. One's closer to the center, one's further to the edge. We want to place the screws closest to the center. I don't know if there's a front or a back to this. May not matter. There's no writing on it, so I guess it can go either way. So what we're going to do is we're going to take one of these screws that came out of that plastic bag, and we're going to align it so it fits in to the section that's going to align it closer to the center. And what holds that screw in and keeps it from moving are these little tiny rubber washers. We're going to just fit one of those right over the top and push it straight down, and then that'll hold the screw in for us. If I push it down all the way. See that? And we have to repeat that. We have to go across all three corners, closest to the inside for socket 1156. Yep. So I'm just going to repeat that process here. This mounting technique is a little bit more cumbersome, than the side. The side, this piece is already done for socket 1156. You slide it in. The T-bar that goes across, that's already on. So the side installation is quicker, and I think the side is about $10 more last I looked. But the heatsink is also another 50% larger, so it should have more cooling ability than the Be Quiet. if everything else is equal. And you get the free screwdriver from Scythe as well. But in a pinch, this is fine. It's a good second choice, I think. It's just a little more involved in putting it together, and it saves you a couple of bucks. As long as you don't need the bigger heatsink. Okay, now this should just slide in back here, just like so. I'll set the board back down. Next, these brackets have to, well, not the brackets, rather the nut spacers have to go on. And one side of this has grooves in it for a screwdriver. That's the side you want facing up, so you can tighten them down with a screwdriver. But we'll get them all started here. Scythe screwdriver will come in handy even for other manufacturers' coolers that don't give us a driver. I could probably tighten that down better with a straight edge now that I'm looking at it. That's good. It doesn't, you don't want to crush your motherboard, but you do want those tight. Then these brackets are going to go on, and I think these brackets go on over the same direction as the latch. If it's the same as other coolers, let me just, yeah. And so these also have 2 holes as well. And for socket 1156, we want the hole closest to the bottom on this bracket, closest towards the CPU. That's the only way it's going to align onto these, to align with these nut spacers we just put in. And so back to that plastic bag that was sealed, apart from the 4 larger nut spacers, we are not using those, but there is also some regular screws in here, and that's to secure those brackets. 2 for each bracket. So we'll get that one started, and then we can align this. There we go. Those don't have to be super tight. The heatsink is going to secure onto these, so you definitely don't want them loose. But other than that, you don't have to really torque them down or anything. And then the way this little T-bar works is that's going to sit in a groove on the heatsink, and when you drive the screws into it, it's going to push the heatsink down onto those brackets. So that's why nothing really attaches this bar other than the mounting screws that sandwich the heatsink between the bar and the brackets. And that's what these bigger screws here are for. There's 2 of those, 1 for each side. Now I'm going to just double check that those are snug. Yeah, those feel good. And now the heatsink can go on, and we can remove this plastic cover that's covering up that thermal compound. The heatsink can go on either direction. It doesn't matter on the Be Quiet, but because there is the word Be Quiet across the top, I would want to put these in so if the motherboard were situated like this in the case, I don't want the words upside down. It doesn't affect the cooling at all. It's just an aesthetic that I'm looking for. Whether or not you put this in right side up or upside down, it's easy to tell. There are little grooves that stick up that are going to go into little teeth down here. And when it's aligned in the middle, it locks in so it won't move left or right. So the top should be smooth and the bottom will have the grooves. And we're going to just set that down on top with the Be Quiet writing facing the bottom of the board. And then these one screw on each side secures it. Now this I do want to make sure is tightened down to make sure we have all the pressure we need on that CPU between these two surfaces. You'll see just how much more that screw is turning. And that's why I always check them by hand. That's what that looks like. Now the fan, these parts are extra, we don't need them. Done with the directions. I'll just set all that aside for right now. And then the fan brackets, 2 of these are extra. So we'll set 2 of them aside. And as we decide to put this fan on, we know where the supports are. That's where the air is going out. And where there are no supports blocking the fan, that's the air going in on this side. We want the air to come in from where the RAM is and to be pushed back out towards the back of the case. And I don't want the cable wrapped all the way around this, so I want the cable coming out closest to the CPU fan header right there. So that's the orientation I want, which if you look on the back kind of has the label sideways, but no one's going to see it. One of the things that bothered me about this cooler was the fact that these little fan hangers, they don't securely fit in the fan. What holds them on is the tension. So we don't have any tension on it right now, so they just fall right off. And that did have me concerned when I was initially evaluating these coolers because I wasn't sure if they were going to stay on during shipping. But I have shipped a couple of them and they've arrived just fine. So once I extend a little pressure to these and put some tension on them, they slide into the grooves in the heatsink. And I'm just gonna line up the top of the fan with the top of the heatsink and pull straight back on it. That's the tension we're looking for. And I might be caught between 2 grooves. I hate it when that happens. And then this side is a little droopy, so I'm gonna just lift it by 1 groove. That's something, again, a customer would never likely notice, but doesn't really affect the cooling. But since it has a glass, even if it didn't have the glass, I'd still want it level. You can see how loose that normally sits. And that was a little concerning, you know, when I was initially evaluating these coolers, but it doesn't seem to be an issue. Now, while I've got the motherboard out, this is a good time to zip tie that cable. Grab a couple of short zip ties. I like to use needle nose pliers to pull on the zip tie to tighten it. I've got these nice angle cutters. These are made in Italy. I love these things. And all these tools are available, along with the zip ties, at Amazon, where I have a little Amazon shop you can look at, where all of these parts and tools are listed. Okay, so as you can see, I've got that wire managed now, and I don't have to worry about it later. So I can go ahead and turn that the direction I need it here, which I've done it backwards, unfortunately. Well, see, now I didn't think about that. There's a notch here, and I can twist it and sort of make it fit, but you know, I don't like doing work like that. I need to fold it the opposite way so that when this connector comes out the other side, it's facing where the notch is, rather than twisting the cable in on itself. So that was a waste of zip ties. That's what happens when I'm trying to work in a hurry. I make little mistakes like that. I don't have any more little zip ties. They're all long. All right, well, so be it. So let me fold it the opposite way now, and then that should end up with the connector facing the other way. Nope, I'm still missing something here. I want the connector facing this way, which I guess means one way or another this cable has to get twisted. Rats. Well, that's pretty much the way I had it. That's the easiest way for me to do it. If I go the other way, folding it on top, it still doesn't change that it has to be turned. Rats. So if I twist it closer to the fan and then fold it, then it should end up with the connector facing the right way. Let's try that, see if that'll work. So now the twist is going to be up here, and then I can just kind of fold this cable in like this and slide it onto the connector right there. That's a nice clean cable management job, even if it took me twice to get it right. Okay, let me get this stuff out of the way. I need to get some RAM put on, and then we can put the board in the case. Let's see what I have for RAM that we can use on this build. Oops, wrong light. What do I have? What do I have? Do I have any glowy RAM? Oh yeah. Let's use some RGB RAM in here since we've got a glass case. I've got some Kingston Fury Beast RAM with the RGB on the top. It's good budget RAM for a budget build, while still having a little bit of flair. Bingo, bada bing, bada boom. Now we're ready to install. And I don't know if I put Windows 10 on this or not. It might already be preloaded and I just have to do updates. If not, I'll have to do a complete reinstall of Windows 10. But I've done enough of that for the last, well, all of 22 to last a lifetime. Now, with regards to those motherboard mounting points, let me just double check and see if everything is where it needs to be as far as the motherboard standoffs are concerned, because I may have to move them again. Let's find out. Set this down. Okay, there's our 3 across the top. Okay, that one's good. That one's good. I think we're good to go. Yeah, this looks like it's going to fit just fine. I don't even know how to react anymore. I'm expecting everything to give me grief, and you know, when you pick the right parts to go in the right case, well, it just works a lot easier. The whole idea of these standards is that if you have a micro ATX board and you have a case that says it supports micro ATX boards, there shouldn't be fitment problems. And yet, given that there's 3 different kinds of mounting layout for micro ATX boards, if this board specification, or if this case specification, you know, has some fine print regarding which micro ATX boards it's compatible with, I didn't see it. If such a thing exists as a disclaimer regarding the limitations of the case. I think we're good to go. Let me see if we can get this mounting screws lined up and to go into their standoffs beneath, and then we're rocking and rolling after that. Off to a good start. That center post doesn't want to go through. It's like it's too wide. That's bugging me. I'm going to take these back out and figure out why the center post won't go all the way through the hole. If it's an alignment issue or if that center post is too wide, that'll be a new one. No, it's seating down on the center post. It's just, if anything, it's a little too narrow. So it's not holding the board as tightly as I would expect it to. So as I'm putting the screws down, I'm seeing the board kind of warp a little bit. Now, having the board warp a little doesn't hurt anything, but it's not normal, in my experience. If the board is seated right, it shouldn't warp at all. So I had to back those 2 off I just put in, because now the holes closest to this side, they're too far up. So I have to push down on the board. Now it's aligned. And then we have 3 across the top. Let me make sure I got everything else tightened down here. Looks golden. So we pick this back up and show it to you. You can see that's much less of a struggle today than it was yesterday. And you would think that, as I mentioned, when things are meeting a standard, that it should go together regardless, but we still have a ways to go with that in the PC world, and especially when we're emphasizing the aesthetics. Why Davies contributed £2. Says, which coolers would you recommend for a 12900K? I would be looking at either a liquid cooler or that giant Noctua cooler, that big air cooler that's like this big. The problem with the big air cooler is going to cover any RGB you've got. You won't be able to see all the RGB underneath of it, like from your RAM, and it puts a lot of weight hanging off the side of the board, which isn't bad unless you're shipping the computer. So a liquid cooler would definitely be the way to go, in my opinion, on the 12900K. Ron B says he just purchased a Win 10 Pro key. Thank you. Well, thanks, Ron. You know, the folks over at VIP CDK Deals have been really supporting the channel, and it'd be great if you're looking for a Windows 10 or Windows 11 product key, or an Office 2016, 2019, or 2021 product key. Not only do you get a great price on it, but you get great customer service, and you're supporting them and they're supporting us. So yeah, could you go on eBay and buy a key from some unknown seller that's going to get banned the minute you buy that key because eBay doesn't allow those sales, and then roll the dice and hope the key works and maybe save a little money? You could. Probably available on Etsy too in the same way. But if you want a guaranteed key that's going to work, it'll activate once. These are OEM keys designed to activate once, and they stay activated unless you change the motherboard. Or at least in the case of Windows. And the keys, when I last bought a key, I just bought one yesterday. It was using the coupon code CARRY with all the links in the video description below this video. It cost me $15.90 for Windows 10 Pro with a free upgrade to Windows 11 in the future. Could I get Windows 10 Pro cheaper from a questionable site that may or may not work? I could, but it's not that much cheaper. I mean, it's only $15.90, and this place has customer service. If you have any problems, you reach out to them. If they don't solve any problem you have, you reach out to me and I'll solve it. But give them a chance if they made a mistake, or if you made a mistake, to correct that before bringing me into it. But I'll guarantee I'm going to make it right. And you're showing them support and they're showing us support. So why not support the sponsors that are supporting us? And you don't have to roll the dice with wondering if you're going to get a product key that works or not. So yeah, appreciate that you took advantage of the offer. Folks at VIP CDK Deals have been a pleasure to work with, and I wish I would have signed up with them earlier. Okay, so we still have all our cabling to do, and I'm going to step away for a minute. I want to go outside and get the mail before it's too dark to look in the mailbox, and I need to take just a little breather just for myself. In the meantime, if you have any questions, I'm just going to be gone for like 5 minutes, if that. Go ahead and put any questions you have in the chat room, because there's a 90-second delay at least from when I talk to when you hear me. And by the time I get back, we'll look and see what questions are to be addressed, and then we'll move on with the cable management. Oh, it's actually a little cold outside. I like it. I should be taking this broadcast outdoors today. It's nice weather. It's going to be 1,000,000 degrees next week, so I better enjoy the last few moments of the colder weather while we have it. All right, let me look in the chat and see if I've missed any questions in here. Daddy Naranjo says he bought a Windows key from them and didn't even need one. He's just going to have it for when he does his next build. I advise you not to do that, and the reason why you shouldn't is, you know, when somebody's looking for customer service more than 30 days after the sale, it's what scam artists do, and it's hard to differentiate a sincere customer who bought something ahead of time before they needed it, who then has a problem with it. Who knows, you could have had a problem with it from day one, but you never knew that. And so once you exceed that 30 days, if the key doesn't work that you bought, it's a little late to be asking for help. It's very suspicious. So what I would recommend is wait until you need the key to buy it, or at least use it within 30 days, strictly so we're not doing this customer service battle. This is typical amongst all companies. If you went to Best Buy and bought something, and then after 30 days have passed, you want to return it because you have a problem with it, they're going to say, hey, that's between you and the manufacturer. And if you're beyond the manufacturer's warranty, it's not based on when you took the product out of the box. It's based on the day you bought it. That's the day your warranty starts. So while I appreciate your support, do bear in mind that if you have a problem with your product key, it's just a more difficult battle to convince folks that you're not a scammer and that you are sincere and a real customer. And if you can just avoid being in that scenario, that's what I would recommend. Also, my goal is to have this deal with that I've arranged with the VIP CDK deals for a minimum of 1 year from when I started, and preferably indefinitely, but my main goal was a minimum of 1 year. So I started this back in, was it October, November? So we're only about 6 or 7 months through, and we still at least have another 6 months, and preferably another 6 years, but I don't plan that far ahead. But I did know that when I set up the deal with them that this was going to be a long-term. Most of the time when I do deals with other companies, we offer a significant discount for a very short period of time. Things like RoboForm or the upcoming offer from Acronis, which I'll talk to you about on Friday. Those are limited time discounts. The discounts being offered at VIP CDK deals, they're more of a everyday low price for my viewers versus a limited sale price for a small period of time. So in order to keep that price low for everybody, that's why you're not seeing $5 keys. Could we do it? We could do it for a couple of weeks, but then who's going to want to pay 15? So you run into this situation where it's like, if we want to do a long-term relationship, then we just need an everyday low price. And that's what we've come up with for you guys for, like I said, a minimum of 1 year. And we're only about halfway through that. So you don't have to hoard them or worry about buying them while they're available. Master Singleton wants to know if there's a good way to tell if a PC motherboard case standoffs matches the motherboard standoff hole position when you buy it online or in the store. I'm not aware of any apart from reading the specifications of the board, even if it means pulling up the PDF manual online from the case manufacturer and then pulling up the manual for the motherboard manufacturer and seeing where the mounting holes are and seeing if they'll line up. Sometimes they'll show it as a measurement and just check to see that those measurements are the same. If anybody knows of another way that's consistently used by all case manufacturers, I'd like to know it myself, because for the most part, I'm using standard ATX motherboards, and all cases support those. It's where you get into the micro ATX that's a little wonky. All the mini ITX ones are the same as well. There's just one screw in each corner. That's super easy. It's only when we get into the micro ATX, there's like 3 different screw layout patterns for micro ATX that are possible. And it's quite common to see motherboards only support 1 or 2 of the 3. Mike Ladd said he paid $350 for his 9900K. Seems the price has risen substantially since then. What happens with computer parts, and I guess a lot of people don't understand this, they say, well, that's an older part, so you should charge less for it. That part's 2 or 3 years old. It's like, well, that's not how computer parts work. Computer parts initially are priced high upon release because of demand. But after the bulk of people that are going to buy it, then the price kind of settles into the regular market reasonable price for it. And then that chip eventually gets replaced with something newer, and they'll phase out whatever inventory they have. They shift manufacturing to the new chip, and then that chip isn't made anymore. So we're back to higher supply than demand, and that causes the older chips, and generally older hardware, to go up in value because there's a limited supply. They're not making any more of them. And if somebody's in a situation, and I'll just paint you a picture, if you have a manufacturing facility and you have a computer that's designed with specialty software to control some process in your factory and it breaks, the easiest solution is to put that computer back into action without any major changes that would affect the software. So if it's running a 9700K or a 9900K and it's the chip that went bad, then you want to buy another 9900K. If you go to a 10th gen or an 11th gen, the software that's custom written for your factory may not work. It's possible. So if you look and see what prices for motherboards are that are socket 1151 motherboards, they don't make them anymore. So the price goes up because there's a limited supply. Same with the CPUs. They don't make those 9900Ks anymore. Price goes up. Now the 9900K was a $629 processor. I've never, ever seen it for $350, not even used. So that's outrageous that you got a bargain price like that. That had to be some kind of clearance somebody had towards the later end of its life of production, its production life. But nowadays, the 9900K, because it's no longer made, as I've already been saying, it's going to drive the price up for those few people who want it. They're going to have to pay for it. So computer parts go up twice. Their initial price when released to market, where you've got greater demand than you have supply. Then the madness wears down, people calm down, they're able to manufacture more product than people are buying, and when the next chip comes out, they want to clear the shelf space that the older chips are taking up, and they might discount them to get them gone. Then they replenish the shelf space with the newer model, which again comes out at the top price, where you have people more in demand for it than there is supply. After a while, that previous edition of the chip starts to creep up in value as people realize the supply is dried up and all that's left, especially if it's new in box. That's it. That's the last of them. And if you want that, it's hard to get, so the price goes up. William Lynn asks, if I have a laptop and I buy a product key from VIP CDK Deals, will I still get support from the laptop manufacturer? Well, the laptop manufacturer is going to support whatever they sold you, nothing else. So if your laptop has a hardware problem, or presumably you're wondering if it has a hardware problem, that has nothing to do with Windows 10. If the laptop manufacturer included Windows 10 with the sale of the laptop, you should not have to buy a new key. The key stays permanently fixed into the unique hardware hash of your laptop, whether it's built into the BIOS or not. Choosing to install the proper version of Windows 10, Home versus Pro, as long as it's the same version that was activated prior, it'll reactivate automatically the next time you check for Windows updates. If the laptop came with Windows 7 and you're putting Windows 10 on it, then your warranty expired long ago and you weren't getting support anyway, regardless. So I hope that answers your question. So I said cable management earlier. I meant to say just the cabling. Let's do the cabling now and see if we can get this thing up and running before it's midnight over here. It's 7 o'clock in the evening already. So see if I can get this done sometime today. This is the USB, the 3.2 connector. We are not going to use that because this motherboard does not support it. Where to start? There's our large motherboard connector. And we can run that in right like so. And around like this. Oh, it's so much easier. I feel like that's on. I didn't hear it click, but it's not coming off. And then we have, let's see, that's for the CPU. That's for the graphics card we're not going to use. Those are the front port switches and LEDs. That's our SATA cable. We're definitely going to need that. Okay, that's our CPU cable. CPU power right there. Bring that up into the corner. It's a bit of a tight fit to get that connector on, but it's still much more room up in this corner than in a 200R with the scythe cooler because of the heatsink being bigger on the scythe. And there's two connectors, which is unusual for these cheaper power supplies to have two of them. Usually you only get one. And I'm just debating if I'm better off using the inner one or the outer one. I just kind of debating with myself over which one I would prefer, which one's going to make the cable management easier. I think it's going to look better using the one in the middle of the cable, so I don't have so much cable on this side of the board to try to hide. Now, as much as this rear fan is still getting in my way of reaching in, remember this case also came with a fan on top, and that would absolutely interfere with any cabling you've got to do across the top of the board. So I think right out of the gate, if you were to buy this case, universally that top fan needs to come out if you want to move it to the front, or don't use it at all. But I wouldn't leave it up there. I'm just thinking, if it's this difficult now, imagine how much more difficult it would be I would absolutely have to take that fan out. Okay, so that's in there. As for the rest of this, we have the front fan that we can hook up. If we look at the motherboard for fan headers, as I recall, this board didn't give us very many, but let me grab a flashlight in my glasses and let's take a look and see what it's going to offer us here. Glasses, flashlight, okay. Step around, and what do we have? I have a system fan up here, CPU fan there. Oh good, and a system fan there. That's exactly how many we need, and that's exactly how many the board offers. That's a nice coincidence. So we'll grab this fan cable and we'll bring it in. You know what, we can bring this in either way, either from the side or the top. And that one's just going to go right up there. This one kind of stinks when they put the connector in the middle of the board like that. There's no way to hide it. It's just going to stand out no matter what you do. So I guess I could end up taking this fan out. Well, maybe I don't have to. Maybe that cable will fit behind the fan and the I/O cover. Tuck it in. And then plug it in right there, like so. And then back around on this side, we have the front power switch and the power LED. There is no reset switch or hard drive LED offered on this case, unfortunately. And so those go in the standard same place they always go, without their brethren. It's weird to put on a power switch without a reset switch, and it's weird to put on a power LED without a hard drive LED, because they go right next to each other, and it just, for me as a builder, just feels weird to have them missing. Okay, so that looks good. We've got the USB 3 connector there just below the power connector, so we can bring that up. And we'll plug that in right there. So on this connector, you know that notch that I said was facing the bottom on the other board? That faces the inside of the board on this board. That just goes to show you there's not just one way they all follow. And then we've got our front audio connector to hook up. Go above that or below that? I guess I'll go above it. Can I bring it up in there? It should be just enough room. There should be a hole right up above there. Typically that cable goes to the back corner, which is exactly where it is, right there. That just pushes on. And then just SATA power to this RGB and we should be good to go. So what is this? Oh, that's the ARGB connector. It's the 3.1, don't care, don't care. And then this is our SATA power to light up the front RGB. And now we can plug in keyboard and video and power. And let's see if this thing's already got Windows 10 on it. I'm not even sure. No memory of doing this, so I have no idea what state it's been left in. We'll go here and here. And then my keyboard and mouse. There we go. Now you'll see when I spin this around how the cables are snagging on everything. If you ever notice, I'm saving the wire ties, if they're good strong wire ties, because I like to use them as temporary cable management for situations just like this, where I can grab all the extra cables I'm not using and grab a spare wire tie and just very loose, you know, it's not going to stay this way very long, but then I can wrap the wire tie around those cables so that they're not dragging and pulling things off the counter, which drives me crazy. I can test my single USB 3 port with the wireless keyboard and mouse dongle there. And if we turn this around and hit the power button, we should see it start to glow. Have to hit the switch on the power supply. Now let's do it. Now that should get us running. And let's go to the HDMI input on the capture card and put myself in a corner and see what this thing is doing. So far, nothing. Mike Ladd contributes $10. He says he got the Intel i9 9900K on Amazon during a sale. I kept checking for months to watch for it to drop. It was $383.58 total, shipped in January of 21. Been watching your content for years. Love your content. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, January of 21, that chip would have been 2 or 3 years, about 2 years old, or 3 years old. I think it came out in 2018. Is my RAM lit up? Yeah, the RAM is lit up in there. Reboot and select proper boot device. Well, I guess I didn't install Windows 10 on that. I guess we will now. So we'll just turn this off, plug in my Windows 10 installation media. I have a video showing you how you can download and create your own Windows 10 flash drive for free, officially from Microsoft. But you have to pay money if you want to activate it. But it'll run, you know, without activation. It'll just leave an annoying watermark on your screen and prevent some customization. But just type in YouTube search, Kerry Holzman, Windows 10 USB, and it'll walk you through step by step. You need an 8 gig USB flash drive or larger. Don Allen contributes again. He says he contributes $10 and he says, here's another little bit for you to use as you see fit. Well, thanks for your continued support, Don. I appreciate you. We're going to go through the standard process of Windows 10. I always select I don't have a product key. I always select Windows 10 Pro because the difference when you're buying Windows 10 Pro versus Windows 10 Home from CDK deals is only a couple dollars difference. So you might as well just get the Pro and you don't have to worry about the option to upgrade later on. And then we'll agree to the end user license agreement. Always choose a custom install. There's our 500 gig NVMe drive. I'll hit next. And it's going to create all the partitions that Windows 10 needs. It's going to format those partitions, and then it's going to install Windows 10 accordingly. And that's our standard process. Let me check in the chat room as we're waiting for Windows 10 to install to see if there's any other questions I can help you guys with. System's a lot quieter. Is my CPU fan turning? I didn't even look. Let me take a look. Oh yeah. Yeah, the Be Quiet fan is turning. It's nice to have the Be Quiet CPU fan with the Be Quiet case fans. The Kingston Fury RAM looks pretty cool in there too. And though they're both the case, well, the case is not color cycling. The case is stuck on purple, and then the RAM there is just cycling through colors. But seems to fit a lot better. It's not so visually loud as it was configured before. Ron says, Kerry, we've been talking about dogs, makes me want to see Lyle and Jimmy. I'm going to go see them tomorrow. John Williams says he's bought over a dozen Windows 10 Pro keys from VIP CDK deals. Yeah, you and me both. Arnold says, I wish I could still buy either an 8700K, an 8086K, or a 9900KS, but it always is a risk with used. Yeah, well, I've got an 8086K built in the Nuka-Cola case back at Studio A that I haven't done anything with. Once it's been built, I never cable managed it and I never finished it. And I've got the 9900KS out of Madi's older machine, but it's being sold as a whole system, not just the chip. Because as a seller, I don't want to just sell a chip. It's too risky from somebody pulling a scam that wants to send back their old damaged chip and then say, you sold them that one. So it works both ways. Speaking of Madi, contributes $10, and Planet Cryos with $10, and Bob Connors with $5. Planet Cryos says, keep the $10 going. And Bob Connors says, I'm loving this video. I hope to see you use my 4000D in the next build. Yeah, I'm thinking the 4000D will be a great fit for the board I just pulled out of here and that liquid cooler. It'll be a more appropriate case. It's a bigger case, and just, I think things will fit better and it won't be so frustrating for me. And Madi again with $10. Thanks for keeping the $10 going there, Madi. All right, so now we're at the final step here of the Windows 10 installation configuration. So yeah, we're going to be in the United States, and we want the US keyboard layout with no additional layout. Let's say I don't have internet at this time. Continue with limited setup, and then I will just be able to create a local user account that way, which I'll just call user. Enter, keep the password blank. Again, the final end user of this computer can change the username and password to whatever they see fit. I turn everything off but location settings and hit accept. I'll say not now for Cortana, but any of that can be adjusted or turned back on the end user preferences when they buy the machine and it's theirs. Nothing I'm doing is permanent. Dennis wants to know if I can use the power LED as a hard drive LED, since the RGB on the front panel would obviously be an indicator that the machine is on. Yes, you can, but where is the power LED on this system? Oh, it's up here on the power button. So your power button would blink and flash if you did that, but you absolutely can do that for sure, yes. How is the Arsenal gaming tag there? Is it the BIOS? Yeah, that's just a BIOS logo. You can often customize those yourself. So now that Windows 10 is finished installing, I can go ahead and pull the flash drive, and then I can plug in the internet connection and begin the Windows 10 updates. System is nice and quiet. I can hear it a little bit. You know, it's not whisper quiet, as the name Be Quiet would have you believe. On the other hand, we also don't have the panels on it, and the panel on the other side is sound dampening material on it, and that could make a difference in, you know, making this thing completely silent, potentially. But we're a ways away from putting the panels back on. So let's not get too excited about that. So we're going to go to Windows Update and skip this for now. And there's going to be a lot of updates missing, so this will take a while. Now on a follow-up show, I'll get more into running Prime 95, seeing how the cooler works. Ideally, I'll have the cable management done, and this may end up either being a system I sell cheap or I end up giving away. I haven't made up my mind yet. I've paid for all the parts here except for the case and the cooler. The cooler and the case were sent to me by Be Quiet, and I've had that cooler for some time. I'm happy to get rid of it. But I've paid for the storage, I've paid for the motherboard, I've paid for the CPU, I've paid for the power supply, and I will have to pay for a Windows 10 activation, which, as you know, is $15.90. So if somebody wants to make an offer on it, I would rather sell it than give it away. Any sort of support to the channel helps keep the channel going. But if someone's in, someone is a frequent contributor here, and I would certainly consider them for the giveaway as well. And we'll see where that goes. So if you're interested in the system and you want to make an offer, in the comments below, you let me know. What will remain is the cable management needs to be done, and I do need to run the Prime 95 test. And even if that cooler does not keep the CPU cool after a few minutes on Prime 95, I'm going to leave it that way, because it's the systems that you would be that demanding, that you would be pushing them that hard for that long to cause the cooler to not be good enough. Those aren't the kind of systems you should be expecting to get super cheap or for free, quite frankly, if you're pushing the system that hard. Under normal usage, no one would ever push a machine that hard for that period of time that was expecting it to run without overheating or having a heat situation without spending about $1,000. So adjust your expectations. Obviously you could change the cooler yourself if you wanted to spend the money to do that, to put a bigger, larger cooler on, if that even is a problem, which it may not be. We'll follow that up on a follow-up build. I don't want to sit here and wait for all these updates to go through the process and run Prime 95. It's nearly 7:30 in the evening here, and it's going to be another hour before we get to that point. So we'll save that for another day. But I do want to thank everybody for joining me today, and if you have any questions for me, and this will be the final hour or final few minutes that I can address any questions you have. Yeah, there's another $10 from Madi. Thanks again, Madi. How do you edit a BIOS logo? That depends on the manufacturer of your motherboard, and you would need to contact, you probably want to go into the support forums for the make and model of boards you have to see if it's possible. I don't recommend you do it. You're messing around with something you shouldn't be messing around with. If you don't have that kind of knowledge, you could permanently damage the BIOS, bricking your motherboard, and it's not something I would toy with. Some manufacturers will make a specific BIOS image update tool for some of their boards, but they're usually the higher end boards. I recommend you stay away from it. But good luck to you if you decide to go down that path. William wants to know if Malwarebytes will slow down laptop performance or impact battery life. It's possible, depending on the age of the laptop. A modern laptop should have no problems, because a modern laptop has a lot more available resources and power than an older laptop, and that will have an effect on any performance that would be noticeable. So if you're running a laptop that's low on RAM and has an older, slower CPU, and then you throw Malwarebytes on it and ask Malwarebytes to start running a scan, yes, you would probably notice that. But that would be true for any antivirus product. What is this computer doing? It looks like it's checking for updates again. And it's taking its sweet time. So I think I'm going to force a reboot here. Update and restart. Let's do that. Planet Cryos thinks I should have bobbleheads made and sell them. I don't know where anybody would get a bobblehead made. I know that there are people on Etsy that will sell like custom Funko figures. You like send a few pictures of yourself and they'll design a Funko figure, but I can't find anybody that'll make me like 30 or 40 or 50 of them. One Etsy seller I contacted was super happy and excited to make me a Funko figure for about $100. But when I said, you know, could you make me 40 or 50 of them? They said, no, this is just a side job. I don't want to do that much work. I said, would you make me 3 of them? And then they stopped answering my emails and they wouldn't take the sale and refunded my money, which was weird. You'd think if you enjoy doing that, I'm giving you an opportunity to do more of it. And apparently it scared them away and they were frightened of me. So that project never got, I never found another seller. I mean, there's plenty of other sellers. Some of the sellers I was talking to are in the Ukraine, and of course it's a whole mess right now, and many of the Etsy sellers that were available, you know, selling from the Ukraine, their stores are closed for obvious reasons. Earl wants to know if I built a 12th gen i9 12900K with a Mugen 5. No, I wouldn't do a 12900K with a Mugen. I've already said that. It's too hot. I would use a liquid cooler. Why would you buy the most expensive Intel consumer-based CPU and then buy one of the cheapest coolers you could put on it? That doesn't make any sense. If you're going to drop $600 on the CPU, you should expect to drop at least $100 on the cooler. If you never push the 12900 hard, then the Mugen 5 is fine. But the minute you start making that thing work, it won't be adequate. You will have a heat situation. It's an inadequate cooler for that specific chip. Go back to Windows Update here. Good. All right, guys, I think that's going to wrap it up. I don't see any other questions coming in. Thank you for hanging out with me today. Thanks to Mati OL and Bob Connors and Planet Cryos and Don Allen and Mike Ladd and Y Davies and Danny Naranjo and Rick Lakes and Captain Blinsky, The Greek, Gary Tatum, Andy Kane, Sting, Sinister 21, and Daniel Ramirez for your contributions and support today. Also, of course, to Michael Dane, Luke Greeny, and all the others that will send through PayPal or Amazon gift cards, like Kelly Stewart, Jose Rivera Estacio, John Jack Wilson, Peter Laycock, Ross Whitehead. Thanks you guys so much for continuing to support the channel. Thanks for everybody who participates in the chat room in a friendly manner. You're always welcome. If you're shy or for any reason not hanging out in the chat room, well, we sure would love to have you in there. You just got to be nice. Don't let being shy stop you, because everybody's super nice. They're not going to say anything mean to you. And if they do, they won't be here very long. So don't put that pressure on you. I hope that if you have not participated in the chat, I hope you'll give it a shot, because you're missing 50% of the show, which is the ability to interact with each other. So hopefully we got a lesson learned here on part selection and the consequences of not doing research when working with unfamiliar parts. And you have a better idea of what to expect from certain case manufacturers and certain price points. It's all related. So thank you again for watching. I will see you all again maybe tomorrow, probably not. I got a lot of errands to run. Probably on Thursday, although I have appointments on Thursday, but if they happen expediently, I hope to be back on Thursday. Friday, I will have a special offer that I'm introducing from Acronis, and we'll reintroduce the latest version of Acronis, going through the installation and a sample of how to use it. And that'll be Friday's show. So thank you so much again for watching. I will see you all very, very soon. And until then, bye for now.